here we go. And all of the people will now appear. Oh, there's a gentleman just called you. Well, hello, you. And the people starting to flood in for ramblings. Very nice. You'll love to see it. This is what we like best. Thank goodness for that. Welcome. And now I need music. Both to go in the background of my video, or live stream, and because, to be blunt with you, I can't do this shit without background music, otherwise my mind just stops. I need something to keep the gears in my head ticking over. Right then. Welcome to Ramblings. How am I coming through? Volume level alright? Not too quiet? Chair, how am I coming through? Volume level okay?
Yeah, I mean, you sound like you normally do.
Yeah, but not. I was really quiet last week. Really quiet, like I could hear it in the stream. I was really quiet.
That might be your recording software, though.
How?
Like normal.
Well, normally I'm not that quiet, even in other recordings or streams. I don't know what happened
I'll
last
pull
week.
up the YouTube as well and see.
Yeah, I don't know what happened last year. Just do a check for me, if you could. That'd be sound.
Yep.
Because it's just that one stream, and then other ones that did after it were not that quiet at all. Yeah, we've got to do a live test here, folks. You see, we can't have this going wrong. But yeah, for those of you who are here know the drill, and those of you who are new, this is where you get to ask Fleet questions. As long as they're in the dry dock rules, you can ask away.
Right, I just checked the stream, and it seems you sound about the same volume as I do.
Good, so we're normal. But I don't know what it was
Yeah.
last week then. That
Nah,
must have been a one-off.
I mean,
These things do happen, you know?
yeah.
Okay, so you all know the drill.
Questions, please.
Questions, please. They can be naval history related, just remember. So follow the rules of the server. So no modern conflict questions. No questions about... Well, no. Well, yeah. No political questions about modern conflict. You can,
Yeah.
as per server rules, you can ask technical questions about the war in Ukraine, but purely technical questions only. And ideally, that's really outside my area of expertise, and we are not going near that topic in the Middle East right now. We're not touching it. So no discussion of it, no questions about it.
Please and thank you.
No, not please and thank you. Like, that is how it is.
But
And
yeah,
there will be no...
try to be nice to the dear listeners.
I tried that. We know how that ended. I got bombarded with bloody insanity, and I'm already insane, and it broke me even harder than it usually would.
Well, that picture that Samurai just posted is, you know, remember me a little like the F-82. Like, come on, just join the tailplanes as well, please. Like, go full F-82 on it. Like, you don't need those side ones. I mean, what is this? Like, B-102 or something? Or...
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that. It feels wrong, but I don't know if it was improved. It's got 6 engines.
It's only got two more. It's only got 2 more pods of the B-52. Like,
Yeah.
Like,
I'm sure you could sling an extra one under them.
yeah, like...
Oh no, but no, if you did... Actually, that's not the stupidest idea, because you could have like a mega payload.
I mean, I'm not
that's
gonna lie,
slung
last week
between
was wild.
fuselages.
Like, I was not expecting Drac to show up. That was just, for once, he actually
Yeah, I
surprised
noticed
me.
that.
He got the jump on me, which was rather shocking.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's a shame it wasn't there.
It was a good one last week. I didn't even ask Ryan to show up. Which proves that he does still like ramblings enough to make random appearances. Which means I haven't overused my access to Drac privileges. Which is nice. Because if I'd overused them, he wouldn't do that sort of thing anymore.
Yeah.
So
But
that's
yes,
a good.
please, questions, fire away.
Yes, please ask me
Yes.
questions.
No, that is wrong. No. No. No, no. No. No, no, no. What is it with this server and just creating some of the most cursed designs one has ever seen?
If we knew the answer to that, we'd have the answer to a lot more than we do.
I suppose, yeah, we would. I mean, blame CDOS for a lot of it, but
No, Xenod's designs are blurred, not cursed.
I suppose.
Besides, that man's useful. Can't get rid of him.
Yeah.
Also, I will never get rid of my calling myself the... Oh, I did get rid of the Mad Crazy Admiral of the Dry Dock. I was the Mad Crazy Admiral of the Dry Dock, and arguably I still am.
Be the crazy. I don't know.
Were there any clashes between Allied Sorry. Clears throat. Rune asks, were there any clashes between Allied forces and Axis holdouts that refused to surrender after the official surrender was announced? For instance, Hiro Onoda or Isho Shiro's batshit insane plan to attack occupying US forces with the Unit 731 developed bioweapons, or do you think it's possible that had any of these happened at a big scale, conflict could reunite in the form of Allied occupation forces going guerrilla hunting? I mean, you've basically, in regards to clashes between Allied forces and active holdouts that refused to surrender, I don't think there were many, if any at all. The only one I can remember is that weird one where Allied troops and Wehrmacht soldiers fought an SS detachment going to kill people in a castle.
Yes, yes, the Austrian castle with a bunch of French people in it.
Yeah,
Um,
but I don't... Cycling! I wasn't expecting you, but it is
Well,
awfully...
it is a federal holiday, so I am off
but
work.
It is awfully nice to see you.
Well, you're welcome. Nice to see you too.
Thank you. How am I coming through volume, by the way? I was aware I was really quiet last week. Don't know what happened.
I'd say that's a chat thing,
Ah, fair enough.
because you're at the same volume level for me.
Fantastic.
But then again, I tailor pretty much everything
That you do.
volume-wise, so...
And I can be somewhat loud at times. I have to admit. I don't think there were. We're just talking about the question Runes asked about clashes between. We're just on the first part of it, which is were there any actually historical clashes between Allied and Axis forces after the official surrender was announced?
There were some in the Pacific.
yeah, we got that, like, hero.
Just depends on how small you want to go. If you want to go down to one person, there was stuff into the 70s.
I suppose.
But that's like one person, so that's not really a clash.
Yeah. And then
Nothing big, nothing beyond small-scale skirmishes, effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were basically then going to have to get on to the second part, which is basically had something big happened. I think, and I was going to say to Rudy, he's basically answered his own question. At that point, the Allied forces go guerrilla hunting. Simple as that. The Japanese government of Reconstruction declares those forces rogue elements and just lets the Allied occupation troops off the leash.
What Japanese government? You mean MacArthur?
Oh yeah, well that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what the government.
But also,
of
like,
Japanese
the Emperor.
Reconstruction.
The
as well.
Gaijin Shogun.
Yeah.
Doesn't even need to declare them rogue elements,
Just
because
goes and gets them.
there is no Japan. There is no government of Japan. It is an extension of the United States Army.
I didn't realise it was. I thought we said like a government of Reconstruction. Was it actually just military governance for like a good?
Under General Douglas MacArthur, yes.
When did that actually end? Was it 49, 50?
50s. late 40s, early 50s, somewhere in there. I don't remember off the top of my head.
1950, apparently, I think. That would fit with what I remember, because Japan had just become independent when Korea kicked off. Still, MacArthur did a relatively good job rebuilding the country and removing...
Yeah, he did a better job rebuilding Japan than the British government did Britain.
I know. Shocking, isn't it? Well, no,
Yeah.
well, actually, no. It's
He didn't
not.
have the empire to put the idiot administrators into. I'm joking, people.
Yeah, we got a large loan under the Marshall Plan, and then it just all seemed to go. Well, all the money we got seemed to go up in smoke. Probably on one of Attlee's batshit plans to nationalize everything, rather than just rebuilding. But anyway, that goes.
And then there's a whole wave of denationalizing things, and like your railway system.
The problem. Look, as someone who is rather into railways, the whole thing with the thing is we didn't.
Railways don't make money unless they're freight.
It's the funniest thing in the world is that everyone looks at the UK railway network and goes, it's private. I'm like, no.
It's not the.
It's not.
It depends is the answer, but
The
yeah.
freight carriers who came in after the rail freight sector was broken up, they are fully private entities. They have their own scheduling, their own rolling. They're the closest thing to private operators the country has, because they have their own rolling stock that they own. They don't lease.
Yeah, they own their own sort of stuff. But
And
at the end of the day, the track's government owned, so.
The thing is, I don't mind Thatcher privatising the railways. In fact, after the mismanagement hell that was British Rail, they bloody needed it. But if you're gonna do it,
it did go better than it did for the Australians.
yeah. Like, if she was gonna do it, she should have gone all the way. Create multiple separate modern railway companies that own the trains.
That each have their own areas.
Yeah, they own the train. No, they need to. There needs to be competition. Like they should.
Then the government's going to need to own the infrastructure they roll on, which is not going to end well.
Yeah.
Because the government's got no incentive.
Yeah.
Because I currently live in Kent, and you can see all around me the consequences to the rail system of competition between two completely private railway companies, the London and Dover and South Eastern. It's why there are so many railway lines, quite a few, not quite doubling up, but getting close to it.
The problem,
in certain aspects.
the thing is that gave us a lot of reserve capacity, which was handy during both world wars. And the problem is that
handy, but it's not proper.
Fleet. It didn't. Because it's not an efficient mesh.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like the US where there was enough room for that many railway companies. I think
There wasn't.
Yeah, I think
That's why they all started to collapse the moment there was some sort of competition to rail.
Yeah.
And even then, before that, they weren't doing well.
Yeah. I mean, the Big Four were doing better than the companies that had come before.
Largely because they had merged the companies that came before and inherited all of the problems. But people thought they'd be better, so they got more investment money. That was it. For crying out loud, Pennsylvania Railway had no damn clue where a boatload of its freight rail cars were, even after it collapsed.
Penn Central.
Conrail ended up finding them. And going, what do we do with these? They're ancient.
If we really want to talk tragedies on the rails, let's talk about the abandonment of the Milwaukee Railroad's Pacific Extension. Or just hell, the mismanaged mess that was the Milwaukee Road anyway. You have a main line that's electrified all the way out to the Pacific Northwest. And what do you do with it? You just let it degrade. Like, I want to go back in time and strangle the executives.
To
of
be
Milwaukee
fair,
Road.
it's not actually. It wasn't actually a viable main line.
Yeah, they
As
just...
freight traffic changed, it wasn't going to be viable anyways.
No, it's a shame.
As it stands now, what is it? I am forgetting the name of the primary operator in the Northwest that owns
Berlin.
the old Transcontinental Rail route.
Do you mean the original? Or do you mean the one that rivaled the Milwaukee Road?
It's the major for one of the big big ones today.
Burlington Northern, which then became BNSF when it merged with Santa Fe
Yeah.
in the late 90s.
BNSF is the one I'm thinking of. BNSF right now is still working to fully dual track that entire system. They've got the budget for it to do it in stages, but they are still working to fully dual track that entire route.
I mean, of all the Class 1s, BNSF is, because it's the smallest of the Class 1s, it's the one that actually has to think on its feet and can't just rely on inertia, like Norfolk Southern, like CSX, like...
CSX is actually throwing a lot of money into its network. Its big problem is it and Norfolk Southern have such discontinuous networks all intermingled with each other.
So many trackage agreements and trackage rights are just messy.
It's not even that. It's they don't have fully interconnected networks with themselves. So like CSX's network doesn't connect to all of CSX's network because of the way those two companies were formed.
Jeez.
CSX is putting a lot of money into the trackage that they have, and unlike Norfolk Southern, they understand what locomotive and car maintenance is. Norfolk Southern honestly just needs to die
Yeah,
and
I've
get
noticed.
folded into CSX. It's going to be painful for CSX, but it needs to happen. There's no reason Norfolk Southern should be a Class 1.
They just... How is the broken mess that is Norfolk Southern still going? Like, they've had
Because
so
they have
many
just enough to
tragedies.
keep going.
We're basically seeing in them a repeat of Pennsylvania, New York Central, Penn Central cycle of something that...
Eventually, either somebody is going to come in and buy up Norfolk Southern and throw the capital needed and start changing business practices, or it's going to die.
I had to laugh at that article. I'm sure you've seen it, Cyclic, and the meme that goes with it, where there's an article that said, US rail freight operators say there's not the infrastructure to meet carbon neutral deadlines by 2035 in California, and then it just shows the Milwaukee Railroad using technology that doesn't exist in 2035.
Milwaukee Railroad wouldn't be able to do it by what California want.
What do they want?
They want it to be fully renewable powered to count as carbon neutral,
Well, I'm sorry.
which their own grid can't handle. And by the way, the California grid couldn't handle that sort of fully electrified freight rail network to begin with.
Christ, that really is... That's bad.
The California electrical grid is so bad they have to do rolling blackouts in the summer during the fire season to prevent the grid from creating massive wildfires.
Bloody...
And the state of California won't let PG&E, the operator of the grid, increase rates enough to fund repairing the grid. So without outside funding, which the state of California should be able to provide, and it's not going to come in from outside the state because
Why would it?
the rest of the U.S. doesn't want to pay for their fuck up. Like, they can't do all this stuff they can do. I'm shocked they've figured out a way to provide power for California high-speed rail.
Well, it's their passion project, isn't it?
I think I know how they're doing it. It's kind of hilariously inefficient, but
mean,
It has to be on its own dedicated thing.
I'm quite pleased to see Cali High Speed Rail actually move ahead on this good, steady march towards energization and the running of scheduled services. There's been far too
Brightline does not want anything to do with freight, Turpitz.
Brightline is a dedicated passenger railway, and that's their mission statement.
So a lot of the Northwest's hydro is actually now excess capacity, and they're removing the dams.
What?
Because they have so much wind.
Oh. Well, couldn't they just send the power? I mean, I know this is going to sound really simplistic. And
There's
lame.
only so far you can export power.
That is true.
And they're already exporting power because of wind.
Well, that's good at least. That's nice to see.
So, and it's basically getting split between hydro and wind, and they're getting rid of the older hydro dams, whose reservoirs have largely been sedimented in anyways, to help protect, to help open back up, I should say, new salmon spawning grounds, which is another major industry in the Pacific Northwest, is salmon fishing.
This is good. This all sounds... The Pacific Northwest seems to have its shit together. Oh yeah, I knew that was coming. Well, that's kind of why I said it. So so you can put.
Not really. They have created their own homeless crisis, just like California.
Oh.
Because they have priced people clean out of the housing markets.
Yeesh.
Like people that are like in well-paying jobs too.
Jesus.
Because of the way the cities have done their zoning and developing and stuff like that.
God.
But back to rail.
Yeah, let's get back onto rail, shall we?
Honestly, I'm not all that enthused about Brightline. I think Brightline is going about it the wrong way. Yes, technically they now have a 125-mile-an-hour stretch between Orlando and Miami.
And the HST did prove that you could make cost-effective diesel-powered high-speed rail work.
Well, I mean, it's not even HST. It's been done before.
Yeah, no, I know, but it was more just a more modern example for those who may not be familiar with the ones that came before.
So, like, for example, Amtrak has been running those train sets in the Midwest. Slightly different version of them at 110 miles an hour over most of the Midwest. The infrastructure's getting improved out there for 125. They're switching over the chargers to be able to run some of the north-south sleeper trains, so they don't have to change from electric to diesel.
Like Amtrak
on
seems
the
to be
Northeast
undergoing
corridor.
something of a renaissance in the last
It is
3 years.
And it's not really the last 3 years, it's more the last 10. A lot of the underlying agreements, particularly in the Southeast, got established between Amtrak and the states to start work on another high-speed corridor, one that will extend eventually between Richmond and Atlanta. So running through the rapidly urbanizing belt that is there, with a branch splitting off, hitting Charleston and moving into Jacksonville, Florida.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
Broadly speaking, they are going to start out with establishing 90-mile-an-hour regular intercity trains, and then because they're buying up a disused freight corridor, basically,
Nice.
right of way. They bought that, I believe, from a combination of CSX and Norfolk Southern. Yes, because it's a corridor that was half owned by Norfolk Southern and half owned by CSX. See what I mentioned earlier about their rail networks. And that is going to they're starting, I believe, on a stretch between Charlotte, North Carolina, and Atlanta. And then it's going to extend into the Raleigh-Durham area, and then from Raleigh-Durham to Richmond. And then they're going to create another leg coming off of Raleigh-Durham. I believe Raleigh-Durham. It might be Charlotte, but one of the two in North Carolina, extending to Charleston, South Carolina, and then down to Jacksonville, Florida. And from there, they can tie into existing passenger rail routes along the Atlantic coast of Florida. both that Sunrail uses and probably Brightline. Eventually, it sounds like Amtrak wants to create out of this a much more modern conception of the Northeast Corridor, which makes sense because the Northeast Corridor is a money printer for Amtrak.
It really
The
does
reason
pay a lot of the
the
bills.
reason Amtrak doesn't make money is those long distance routes that have to stay there because there are dozens of towns that they serve where that is their only reasonable connection to the outside world.
If you don't have a car, and some people don't. In the US.
Even if you have a car fleet,
Oh yeah, of course.
you'd have to drive for 500 miles before you'd see the next gas station, which is just not viable.
No.
My work truck, which is diesel, and you get dramatically better miles per gallon with a diesel, has a 500 mile gas tank, and it's already got a huge gas tank for a vehicle its size.
I mean, I am somewhat. I mean, I want to highlight something that will hammer home the point you're making. It's important to bear in mind that while 200 miles.
This
an
isn't
hour,
commuter rail, Samurai.
While 200 mile an hour plus high-speed electric rail with fixed unit trains gets a lot of press and gets a lot of attention by people who say this is what we want. In order to make rail competitive in the modern congested world of American highways, and quite frankly, the budget airlines have been losing their luster for a lot of people in the US, if you can offer a US person who commutes between two cities that might be, let's say, 2 hours by flight. Let's say you offer them a 90 mile an hour express train that takes about 4 hours, but they don't have to do airports, and they don't and the ticket is competitive, and there's a nice meal on the train. If you offer them that's
You're actually missing the main draw of it, Fleet, because you don't understand what it is like to travel on the East Coast.
I was more
so
referring
the
to
pri-
the new services in the Midwest.
Is same thing. Midwest has it worse because they don't have the interstate infrastructure that we do. And most of they don't have the beltways, or as you guys would call them, ring roads, that we do here in the East. Like they have some, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of them with it, but they're nowhere near as well designed or as high capacity. What it comes down to is where are airports located? Outside of the city. Once you land at the airport, you then have to commute to where you're going to be. And this is a really big thing for business travel in particular. It's business travel is the main driver of Arnett. That's also incorrect, and I'll get to that in a minute. Commuter rail is the only way New York City functions. It's the only way Washington, D.C. functions.
Like we'll get to commuter rail, but
We'll get to commuter rail in a minute, but these sort of inner city trains have more to do with business travel than they do anything else.
Yeah, that's what. I'm sorry, I thought that's what I was. Did I not make that clear?
Commuting is like your daily commute when you talk about it in the U.S., and that's not what these are for.
Oh, sorry. When I was referring to commuting, I was referring to. Because in commuting in the UK can also mean a business trip to somewhere else that's not your daily thing. But sorry, I didn't realise that was not how that it didn't have the same connotations in the US.
This is inner city rail travel, and there are certain areas like when I was living in Maryland, if we were going to go up to New York to go, couple day trip to go visit some of the locations that are up there, we would have taken one of the Northeast Regional trains, regular intercity, multiple stretches between DC and New York where they hit 125. So that's really the big driver of it. And the Southeast right now is at a point where now is the time to start implementing right of way and start implementing service, so that you don't end up with a Connecticut-like situation where you are now choke held along a major portion of the route.
By choke held, I presume you mean
Part of the Northeast corridor through Connecticut, they're stuck with level crossings because of NIMBYs. They don't want grade separation for some dumb reason. Don't ask me why. I'd be more annoyed about a level crossing than grade separated rail. Like, whatever.
and because it's level crossing.
And that
in the US.
dramatically reduces speed, and it's also twin track, not quad.
God.
Connecticut is the source of 95% of the problems between New York and Boston on the Northeast corridor.
I mean, if they keep denying Amtrak the means to do this, Amtrak will just go, okay, we'll serve Connecticut with this number of trains, but we will just have...
They can't. They don't have another route.
Can't they build a diversion?
No.
Just a new...
There's no. They that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to turn the current route of the Northeast corridor into a spur that can connect back up and then connect the actual primary cities of Connecticut into a new, modern part of the Northeast corridor. That's what they wanted to do.
But...
And they were going to grade separate the local spur so that it can act very much like Mark's Penn line, for example, where you have rather high speed commuter rail. Mark's Penn line runs at 125 miles an hour as a commuter rail service.
Which I find
In there.
surprising and also quite good.
I would say they're doing it wrong because of the train sets they're using. They're using double-decker cars for commuter rail. The whole point of commuter rail is quick load, unload. You don't spend a while at a station and you focus on rapidity of service.
Yeah, it's like the Germans actually had the
But
right
there's
idea
a
with-
reason that Mark does that.
Yeah, there's a
And
reason-
the
Sorry.
reason is common rolling stock. They're actually getting rid of their HHP 7s and going with an all-diesel fleet with chargers because their other two lines are unelectrified. And they want a common set of rolling stock and a common set of locos.
which reduces
and I don't
maintenance
blame 'em.
costs.
Particularly given the HHP 7s are absolute nightmares to maintain.
Oh god, like they've been well, how do I put this gently, past their use by date for a while now.
Mm-hmm. Well,
excuse me, one thing.
they couldn't function on the Northeast corridor effectively to begin with. That's why Amtrak gave them up. But back to the Southeast corridor here that they're trying to build, they already have the right of way. There's not NIMBYs here for this anymore. They've got the right of way that had low numbers of trains running on it that are far louder than a passenger train. And far longer and far more of a disruption. Initially they're not going to have it grade separated, hence the 90 mile an hour restriction, but they're going to move to get it grade separated and move it to 110. And then move on to 125, and then we'll see where it goes from there in terms of capacity. Once you get that backbone service in, you may very well see better commuter rail service in the areas. But you need that backbone in before any of that really makes sense. And that money's already there. The right-of-way's already there. They're just bringing the rails into FRA standards for passenger. That's where that is right now. And then it's going to be 90 mile an hour initial service. And then they're going to be stepping it up over the years. The hardest part of this is going to be tying it back into the Northeast corridor in DC. There's already passenger rail routes there, but they run over freight lines at the moment. It's doable. It's workable. It does run at 90 miles an hour, which is dramatically faster than you can legally drive on. That's with the road clear. Under normal traffic, 95 between Richmond and DC, you're doing like 30, even though the speed limit is 70. Because 95 is hilariously under capacity in the area, but cannot be expanded. So that's going to be the hardest leg of this, is tying it into DC. The moment it's tied into DC, it becomes a one-day travel time where your employee can also work while they're on the train to get somebody down from the financial office in New York to one of your field locations in Atlanta, Charlotte, or Chapel, or Raleigh, Durham, or eventually Jacksonville.
Which is the
Huge.
ability to travel by land from Washington DC to Jacksonville, Texas, in less than a day is.
Jacksonville, Texas?
That's what you said, isn't it?
No, Florida.
Whoops. Well, either way, it's,
I mean, you can
my point
already
still
do
stands.
that with the Silver Meteor. DC to though that tends to be a overnight because of when the Silver Meteor arrives in DC. But you'll be there by start of business next day. And the Silver Meteor runs on time. For reference, those of you who don't know what the Silver Meteor is, it is a sleeper train, although it does have coach as well, that runs between New York City and Miami. It is the single biggest sleeper route in the U.S., or single highest demand sleeper route in the U.S.
I didn't think there were still high demand sleeper routes in the US.
Yeah,
To
I mean,
improve
as you're
it.
traveling, it covers the most of the eastern seaboard.
So the sleeper is not dead.
No, never has been.
It's actually quite reassuring to watch US rail that isn't the most cryptic class ones, you know, the ones that are just dragging their heels, come back. Like, for
I
example,
mean,
I've
class ones never did. As class ones never did passenger. So
no,
like revenue passenger.
no. I mean just generally both freight railroads and as in that aren't the big class ones and Amtrak and other bodies that are looking to run passenger rail. It's nice to see them coming back. It seems to be that some of the short lines and the one or two smaller railroads that aren't class ones that still exist, like the Montana Rail Link, for example, actually seem to have their head on their shoulders.
It depends wildly. For every one you hear, there's a small one going out of business.
That's true.
But it's a very tough market. They're competing heavily with trucking on those scales, and with coal becoming less and less of a business for them. For these small ones, the class ones really hate doing coal.
Why? I thought coal used to be.
It was a legally mandated pricing.
Oh.
Up until very recently. It's not a very economical for the railroad.
Wasn't that due to the Clean Air Act?
No. It's due to the market on that. It's never been economical at the pricing that Congress has required. And coal is increasingly less and less of a energy product for consumption in the United States, which is why those pricing restrictions got taken off. But it also means that the routes that exist run pretty much straight to ports.
Yeah.
Rather than forcing a railroad to run from mine to power plant.
Yeah. Like, you've got railroads like it's not a short line, it's almost become a full railroad. The Blue Mountain and Reading, I think. A lot of their business is coal. But then again, it does show some of the problems with these mid-tier railroads. The Blue Mountain and Reading basically exclusively uses SD40s or Jeep 38s. These locos that are getting really long in the tooth now. Despite there being...
Could be worse. Could be Metro.
Yes. Should we talk about the mess that is Metro? I feel like we've should.
The less we talk about them, the better.
Yeah, let's just say they're a mess. That's it. We're done. Good. Fantastic.
Buying ancient freight locos and then converting them into passenger locos because reasons.
Cyclic, why do you think...
These stupid gallery cars.
Yeah. Cyclic, I actually have a question for you I've been wanting to ask for a while, actually.
Oh no.
Why have we not seen a rise in the multiple unit in a big way in US commuter rail? Not commuter rail like New York City, like the subways, but things like Metra, things like...
CalRail's doing it.
Yeah, but like, why is
I believe it's Stadler Fierds.
Yeah. Why is it taking so long?
Because most of these haven't been there in their modernization cycle. Like, DART has DMUs, for example. Like Siemens DMUs. So, like, you are seeing that in these newer systems or systems that are looking to revamp themselves and their networks. And there's a reason they'll switch to that. And it's the same reason you want those. They're fast to load, fast to unload, right? Give me 1 sec. I gotta focus. And they're just dramatically more efficient than these big, long train sets. And if you're revamping your entire system, you can really take advantage of their fast loading times, their relatively short length, the fact that they are designed around being rapid transit commuter trains, and you can really maximize the amount of time, or not the amount of time, but the amount of trains you can have on your network at once, minimizing the amount of time people have to stand waiting at platforms. DC Metro during rush hour, for example, you're looking at 5 minutes between trains.
And sometimes even
15
less than that.
outside of rush hour. Like, even middle of the night in DC, you're looking at 15 minutes between trains.
Which is what you want.
Yes, in a commuter network, that is what you want. Whereas currently with Mark, during rush hour, it's a train every 3 minutes. Or, excuse me, every 30 minutes.
Which is
And
not what you don't want people to have to be having to
in
plan
between
their day.
rush hour, it's one every hour.
You don't want people who are using your commute rail to have to plan their, if they miss their train, they're buggered, or well, completely buggered. They should just be able to walk up to a train station and be like, oh, train's gonna be here in 15 minutes. Good, all right, that's fine. Or
yeah, you never have to think about it when you're using the DC Metro or the New York City Metro.
Same
Moo
thing
would
with
be
the
able to
London
tell
Tube.
you far better about New York City than I would.
Yeah, same thing with the London Tube. Or hell,
in
any
like
part of
Long Island Railroad and all the other commuter networks that are in and around New York City. Moo would be able to tell you more. And that's one thing that Caltrans is working on, and their
How are they dealing
their
with power?
subsidiaries.
Because they're switching over to electrification, as you said. How are they dealing with the
Well, they're not dealing with ridiculous high-speed they're not dealing with
true.
trying to do Shinkansen-esque TGV-esque rail. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Ruben, I can answer that question really simply. North Korea ditched steam. They ditched steam actually before the Chinese did, and moved over to a majority electric network. Because the one thing the North Koreans can do is they can actually build new electric locomotives, and they have the capability to burn coal to produce electricity to run their trains.
and it's much more efficient that way than trying to coal per train.
North Korea's diesel there's a reason why when you look at, I know this is going to sound really weird, but North Korean rail tourism for Western visitors, which is actually a thing that exists.
It is a thing. It is weird. Like I've seen adverts for just like a steam rail tour in North Korea. Like, what?
Because of
Why
course
would
they have
you
a
do
JJ
that?
class.
Yeah, but the reason that, like, you see these really well turned out diesels, like these Soviet M62s basically, they're just prolific. In North Korea as their diesels. The reason why they're so well turned out is because for North Korea, you use a diesel if you want to guarantee a train gets somewhere, and it's important that it gets somewhere. Because there's no... Because despite the fact that North Korea can burn electricity to power its trains, because it's North Korea, there can occasionally be unwanted loss of power.
Which is really embarrassing when your electric train sort of just slowly rumbles to a halt.
Yeah. So if North Korea wants to get something somewhere on its rail network, it will use its diesels, because then it guarantees that train is gonna... It's the reason why the diesels are kept in such good internal and external kit. Because for the North Koreans, they're basically their emergency reserve. Oh shit, that train's got to get from A to B, and we need to make sure it doesn't get delayed or stopped or blah blah, etc, etc.
Yeah.
The Chinese railway network was basically built from scratch post-victory in the Civil War. Yes, there were things that existed prior to that, but the modern Chinese railway network is an outgrowth from 1949 onwards. And the reason that China retained steam as long as it did is that China's transition from steam to electric and diesel is probably the only transition that I know of that occurred in a way that most people prior to the rather rapid post-war dieselization of the rail networks in Europe and America thought the age of steam would end, with a slow, gradual, rolling wave of obsolescence that would take decades to finish. But of course World War II happened in the West, so that's not how the West got it. The West basically dumped the steam locomotive once Reconstruction was completed in the 60s. And America even before that.
The US started dumping them in the 30s.
But for places like Africa, Southeast Asia, and Asia proper, the steam locomotive died the way everyone thought it would, and in the way that most people would have considered natural. Slowly.
Things got replaced as they needed to be replaced.
The only exception to that can realistically be said to be Japan, because Japan suffered the same fate that Western Europe did.
Japan didn't have many working things left after World War II.
Japan built a bunch of 282s and 464s to get the passenger and freight moving again. and then as soon as they could, they switched over to electric and diesels. But yeah, China and India are good examples. Steam died naturally. But just to quickly, if you want to talk about high density commuter rail, the Japanese do on 3'6" what a lot of countries would consider impossible to do on 4'8½". Like, bloody hell, they move people in ways that Western nations just can't because of the way culture works differently. It's kind of interesting to watch. We think we've touched upon. Is there anything else you want to touch upon, Cyclic, that while we're on this topic?
Not particularly.
How destroyed was Japanese infrastructure post-World War II? Badly. The Allies blew it to hell. And not just from the air. Like, we have multiple instances of the last times that British battleships fired their guns in anger ever was doing shore bombardment work off the Japanese home islands. Same with some of the North Carolinas and South Dakotas. The last time they fired their guns in anger was off Japan proper. Anything that was even remotely considered to be of use to the Japanese economy, war effort, was systematically targeted and destroyed. Any comment on that, Cycling? I'm not an expert on this area. You might know more than I do.
So one of the key things to remember with particularly absolutely smashing rail infrastructure is just how efficient it was to do strafing runs on marshalling yards. Because you would catch locomotives, and steam locomotives do not do well to their boilers being filled full of half-inch holes. Well, they don't go boom if they're not running, but you can't turn them on. You can't use them.
Yeah.
And when it's got several hundred to 1,000 holes in it, it's not really worth fixing. It's just gonna sit there.
It's scrap at that point, because you'd have to get a new boiler, and in the age before preservation, just build a new bloody steam engine if you're gonna have to get a new boiler.
And in many cases, the Japanese were not capable of doing that by the end.
I mean, certain railways did have standard boiler types, though.
Get out of here, GWR bloody wannabe motherfucker. I see you over there.
No, I'm not just saying that, but I mean, I know, like, Great Eastern pre-grouping, they had at least, it was the same design of boiler.
That
apparently,
is
sure,
one
it
of the
wasn't
things
the
that
most.
the Imperial Japanese, the IJN, sorry.
So there are price caps on utilities in most states, where the state sets how high the price can go. In this case, per kilowatt. And that's what's really hampering PG&E's ability to generate the revenue necessary to reinvest in its infrastructure.
California won't make up the difference.
So $15 million a year is a joke to infrastructure costs for running utilities. That's nothing. They need to be able to dump billions. Okay, so what, 15 billion? Great. How much do you think it takes to redo the electrical infrastructure in a state whose GDP is higher than most nations? They have to completely rebuild the infrastructure from the ground up. It's that old. You're looking at hundreds of billions. And those profits go back into, generally speaking, doing just enough fixes to keep it running. For the next year. Like, it's not a good situation at all. Get out of here with the Mallard T1 supremacy.
Now you listen here, you...
No, you can't argue with me on that.
That's even worse.
What's the...
I hate it.
What are the... No, stop
It
it.
depends how you want to mark your profits for your investors, Arnett.
Samurai, Jesus, stop it. No, go, leave, out. Now that, I respect the weird little Swiss electric powered steam engines. They're fine. But what you're doing to Mallard, no. I just realised the Bully Pacific behind it. Whoa!
That's even worse.
Aye! No! Ugh.
I mean, Southerner, I think we've already covered most of what we wanted to on the North Korean railway. I don't think I got anything drastically wrong, if I remembered everything you've said in the past. But thank you for the offer, but I think we're fine. But anyway, fun, interesting factoid for you all. The Shikansen project, despite how it would originally come out, was originally proposed in 1940. One of the constants was that it was to be a 4 foot 8.5 inch high-speed railway network, but what is not constant was the motive power for it. This is a mock-up of a proposed 484. Obviously the livery is unknown, so they've just done it up in the actual livery of the modern Shikansen. But the idea of the high-speed rail being built as high-speed steam is somewhat amusing to me. Just a bunch of streamlined 484s dashing across Japan on basically non-electrified versions of the Shikansen's infrastructure. Because this
Looks
is...
awfully German, that, doesn't it?
No, actually, I think it looks American with the modern cast driving wheels. And
And I'm just looking at sort of the smoke deflectors
it looks
you've
like
got above the funnel there.
yes,
And
it looks like something that the New York Central would build if it was on crack, like a steam, like an incredible, like a massive Niagara with streamlining. Like it's stupidly ridiculous. Like, but
hang on.
remember-
Yeah, the DBR 01.10.
I hate that cyclic. I hate the unstreamlined T1. That's awful. I don't want to think about that. That just makes me want to throw myself off the side of a building because that's awful.
It just looks like a freight loco.
Ew.
I-
We already have a Pennsylvania freight duplex, and it looks better than that. Like,
Southerner, yeah, that was already mentioned.
the... Like, what was it? They built 64644s, wasn't it? Those really weird-looking ones with the... You know the ones I mean, cyclic. They built about... That's it, the Q2.
No, I really don't, because it's an era of railroading I don't really care for.
But yeah, they built a bunch of stuff.
Oh, please tell me that was the compressor being dropped off from my AC.
Oh yeah, you need to... That's something you need. you've said.
Mm-hmm.
I have problems with turbines on land. I have lots of problems with the A10s on land. A10s? No, I mean, I don't mean A10s. Well, A10s on land is a cursed concept in and of itself. But
I know. I don't want to even think about that.
But the idea of using steam turbines in any form of railway locomotive, or heck, any form of turbine in any form of railway locomotive, makes me want to yeet somebody off a cliff. Because every time they've tried, the same problems have arisen that anybody with half an experience operating a turbine in a marine environment or in a static environment would tell them would be the case. Turbines require constant demand loads, or demand loads that don't change stupidly often, or a way in which you can run them at their best efficiency output all the time, like gearing. And since, for obvious reasons, you can't use a geared fucking turbine on a railway because the gearing for those things are stupidly chonky things.
That they have to deal with the amount of stress put out by a turbine. You know, you can't.
Yeah. Like, even UP's gas turbines were just... Even with the
They largely went away because of the damage they were doing to infrastructure.
Yeah, and also the...
Because of their upward exhaust.
Yep.
And the noise.
And the fuel hogging at low speed.
Like, yeah. Like, they're efficient at high speed, but trains have to stop every now and again.
And also, the freight roads realised that they couldn't run them at the high speeds they were meant to, like 40 mile an hour plus.
Not at the time, no.
Like, every time, and even the GTEL turbine... No, sorry, not GTL. The General Electric turbine in the UK... Sorry, English Electric turbine in the UK that looked like a bloody steam engine on steroids was a failure, despite it being one of the least complex railway turbines ever built. Because again, translating turbine power to the rails, or hell, land in general, is just never going to work. You need direct drive to your wheels, or you need some form of transmission that works. Like, for example, if you're using a diesel-electric drive, or something like that. The only marginally successful turbines that were steam-driven, I remember, was Stania's turbine, the one-off that was built for the LMS and then British Rail, and the Norfolk and Western turbine and the Chesapeake and Ohio steam turbines, which basically were good because they were driving electric motors that drove the wheels. Basically moving power stations more than they were steam engines. But yeah, just to go into... Like, the turbine died and the steam loco died for the reason that Cyclics already said. When, basically, there's one loco that did it. The FT. When the FT appears in that full rake set, the US railroads suddenly go, wait, you're telling me that I can buy 4 of these? Yep. Link them all together? Yep. So one crew can operate it? Yep. And it still generates more power than one of my freight draggers? Yep. Sign me up. And that was just it. That was the death knell for the US heavy freight loco. Some railroads persisted after the fact, but it became brutally apparent to everyone involved that diesel locomotives worked harder, faster, could be ridden more roughly, and had required less maintenance. Aside from some minor hiccups by certain steam builders trying to build diesels. Centipedes. Alco. I hate the Brespatel barn. Just as a concept, why do you need a railway that's fucking 9 meters across? It's just silly. It's that typical Nazi level of silly super project that had no real concept of ever working. It's just It's just a mega project to spend money on so that the economy doesn't collapse immediately after the war. Because again, a National Socialist state only works if there's stuff to spend money on and more things coming in. That's how they work. Or they don't work.
Moon colony.
Funny, but some sort of
It
expansion.
should soak up a lot of money.
Yes, exactly. It's just...
That is a really terrible Photoshop, Samurai.
That's
It is.
awful. It's horrible. I hope you feel ashamed of yourself.
Poor Mallard.
Let's say poor Conrail, they were operating electric freight locomotives at that point.
Ugh, the E44s. Ew. I mean, electrified freight on the Northeast Corridor was an interesting idea when, it was owned by Pennsylvania. But... Conrail...
It made sense for Conrail, and they were very likely going to end up electrifying the entire U.S. freight rail network.
But... what happened?
U.S. politics.
Oh.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, good shout.
Anyway, I do have to depart, you gentlemen, but it was a very informative conversation.
Not at all. Pleasure to have you as always.
Cheerio.
Like, electrified freight rail is something that is coming to the US rail network eventually.
Hopefully.
It can't be delayed much longer.
No, it can. I don't want it to, but it can. The biggest problem with it is tunnel loading gauge.
Ah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So for reference, Keystone Corridor is capable of handling double stack well cars under the catenaries. The problem is the passageways underneath the line for when you need to get the train off the corridor, right? They don't have enough height clearance for double stack well cars.
Could US abandon?
And you'll
double
see
stack?
similar thing. Keystone Corridor is Amtrak owned. You'll see similar things in most of the tunnels through the Appalachians. You'll see similar things in a lot of the tunnels in the Rockies outside of the very big corridors. And even then, those tunnels were only heightened enough to just fit double stack well cars through, the ones that were. There's no room up there for an additional height to get the catenary height that you see on the Northeast Corridor or on the Keystone Corridor to enable you to operate double stack well cars plus catenary in a safe manner. Because the well cars themselves are inches from the roof of the tunnels.
There's barely any room to maneuver at all.
It's just enough because tunnels are expensive.
Yes, that's true. Tunnels are very, very expensive. Well, they can't just... They have to...
You're likely to see them go for hydrogen before you see them go full electric because of that. There will be certain routes that will work just fine and will almost certainly be electrified. But there are plenty of other routes, including the big transcontinental routes, that are very important for freight. Where
Do you reckon we'll see combined...
it's just not an option.
Do you reckon we'll see combined hydrogen electrics? Bi-mode locomotives that can do both power modes in order to avoid having to change crews or locomotives. Obviously,
They've got to change crews very regularly anyways for FRA. regulations.
So they can actually plan it so that they can have a crew change to a crew and loco change to a hydrogen loco, or knowing the US a set of hydrogen locos, because that's how the US railroading works.
Well, it depends. We got to see how the tech goes. I'm entirely speculating on hydrogen. Okay. The technology isn't there yet, but I'm speculating on that because you're seeing regulations starting to pop up. The reality of it is, freight rail's probably the last transportation thing you should target with stuff like that. Because of how insanely more efficient it is compared to other transportation methods.
Indeed. On that we're agreed. It's just your carbon cost per mile for moving a ton of freight is ridiculously low.
Also, I think Rune had some sort of non-railroad related question.
Sure, ask away, Rune. We've just been on this tangent because we got asked a certain question, but please, go ahead. Moving away from trains, what do you think, or what did the planners at the time think, of Edwin W. Pauli's plan to send some of Japan's heavy industry over to China, USSR, etc., so that Japan's ability to wage war is further decreased, and other Asian countries will have some form of initial boost in rebuilding their economy? What industry was left? The B-29s,
Yeah, that was sort of the problem.
The B-29s flattened it all.
So, I think what was done historically was the correct route. In terms of, for the most part, I have some views on how certain things weren't removed from the national conscience. I feel we probably should have treated them a little bit closer to how we treated Nazi Germany in terms of executing large portions of their government.
Yeah, too many of the governments survived and caused problems later down the line.
Like I'm fine with the imperial family. I'm fine with that. Because quite frankly they weren't the ones running the show. But beyond that, I think it was handled the way it should have been.
I think we learned...
Tirpitz, by the way, the U.S. has one of the single largest internal waterway networks on the planet.
And it's still all mostly in use.
Yes. I work on part of it.
And that internal waterway
Be out there next month.
Includes the Eastern Seaboard, because the US said, let's fucking wall off. Well, not wall off, but basically create artificial inland waterways by creating sandbanks off most of the Eastern Seaboard. And so they did. It's just... like, there's a big reason why the US is able to expand so rapidly towards its western boundaries, towards the west coast, because there was this lovely natural...
So, real quick, Tirpitz, I want you to pull up where Richmond, Virginia is. It's literally Richmond, in how it's spelled. The James River is navigable for freight all the way to Richmond.
And the Mississippi is just...
there is a reasonably sized container port inside the city's beltway. And I don't need to mention the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio,
yeah,
Columbia, the Intercoastal Waterway.
It's just... in terms of...
Chesapeake Bay, Hudson River.
Yeah, I think we made it. Yeah, we got it. US rivers on easy mode.
Susquehanna, St. Lawrence Seaway into the Great Lakes,
Although that is shared with Canada somewhat.
Puget Sound, as much as Drac butchered that in the one Pearl Harbor salvage video. I can't even remember how he said it. It was that bad.
Best not to bibs. Oh dear. Sometimes Drac gets
I'm not particularly enthused to go back and watch the video just to find it again either, because it was just I couldn't even figure out he was talking about Puget Sound.
I had one of the more recent videos. He said something that was so badly wrong. I was like, that's out of character for Drac. That's a really, really badly wrong pronunciation of whatever that was. I was like, Drac? And then he says it right later
depending
on.
whether or not you count Taiwan as actually part of the People's Republic of China or not, the US is the third largest by land area country on the planet. If you count Taiwan as part of China, then it's the fourth.
I see. I mean, the US is just big.
We're gonna move past that because nothing is known about that. Jesus. Like, there's no point in talking about that vehicle right now.
It may as well be powered by Sparkly Fairy, who doesn't have a gun that shoots laser beams. To be blunt with you, to give it.
Or just be a T-3485
Yeah.
with cardboard.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Like, I suspect it's more of a thing than T-14 is, but that's also kind of a low bar.
Yes.
If it is actually something, it's a far more sane appearing design than T-14.
Like, the ergonomics look better. But anyway, let's move on.
Korea actually uses ammunition bustle racks with blowout panels.
Wait, they actually do?
Yes, they seem to care more about their crew than Russia.
What cursed timeline
No,
are you living in?
that's because the Russians haven't actually designed a new tank since the fall of the Soviet Union. So,
What cursed
and the
timeline
Soviets,
are we living in?
the T series tanks really are more sort of a leg up equivalent to the M60 series, that sort of thing. No, Tirpitz, they're broadly North Korea's tanks are kind of like a
They start
evolution of both a T-72 and a T-62.
They take the best bits of both, it seems.
Russia's not doing that either. The T-64, T-72, and T-80 series of tanks are a whole different generation of tank to a T-55 or T-62. There's a huge difference.
They're also thoroughly Soviet tanks. I mean, someone I was talking to in real life put it best. We haven't seen a Russian tank yet. We've seen Soviet tanks or outgrowths of Soviet tanks.
Yeah, even Armata is an outgrowth.
But nothing properly Russian.
They don't have the physical room on the vehicle to do that, Gray. Let alone the weight. I mean, it would, if you could make it work, it would help, but it's not even possible on a Sherman. There's a reason you see the sort of quintessential Western box tanks appear, and that is non-explosive reactive armor. It's not DU, Grey Ghost. It's literally NERA is the problem. That's what Choblum is. It's NERA. And NERA fundamentally has different volumetric and weight requirements to rolled homogeneous steel. Or even some of the earlier composite armors. Because a good portion of NERA is literally physical space.
I was doing while we're on the topic of tanks, I was doing some reading recently, and I was surprised to actually, we know how there's been almost a pendulum swing back against the common tank myths of the Second World War in the last few years. You know, like pointing out the Panther's flaws, you know, all the flaws in the Tiger, etc., etc. I was doing some reading of some recently released books on German tanks, and I was kind of surprised to learn that by middle of 44, apart from the known issue with the final drives on Panthers,
Tirpitz, it's not.
you were looking at availability rates for Panthers that were better than the later model Panzer IVs in terms of percent ready for action at a moment's notice.
Yeah, because they weren't being run into the ground and they weren't emergency tanks, and they had started fixing the problems with the Panthers. The big problem is if your transmission breaks, well,
You better hope you got a spare or a
tanks down.
scavenge.
Your tank is down for multiple days.
Yeah.
Even if you have a transmission available to swap in, it's still a poorly designed tank.
Oh no, I'm not denying that, but I was just surprised by, there's been so much, almost too much counter.
Let the geologists get into this a little bit. Naturally occurring uranium is uranium oxide. It is not something you want to handle. It is not something that has any of the properties that you associate with purified uranium, be it depleted or not, because it is an oxide. That's not a T-54 Zuigake. That is a completely different tank. It is a heck of a lot bigger than a T-54-55. The reason it doesn't look right to you is you're used to associating that hull with an Armata, but it's got a 3-person turret because the North Koreans don't use autoloaders. The one thing they are not short of is manpower. I will defer that question to Phoenix. So that would be something for him.
Sorry for a second, I had a brief drop out of communications. I think something went wrong with my mic. Sorry about that.
Did I miss train talk?
You did.
God damn
We've
it.
moved on.
Yeah, we've moved on. Grey Ghost asks, how much more powerful would the Italian rebuilds be instead of reboring their guns to stop the...
I'm just gonna tell Grey Ghost to talk to Phoenix about all of that, because Phoenix literally has the data in spreadsheets.
Ah, well there you are then, Grey Ghost. You can...
So... And Phoenix will be able to give you a much better answer than either one of us will be able to.
Yes, I'm not an expert on naval guns. I can give you a rough. They will be better, but that's pretty much it. Like if you want an answer boiled down to the nub of the issue, it will be better. How much better?
Actually, I'm not even going to say it would necessarily will be better if you do the rebore for what they did for the Gangut's 12-inch guns. I'm not going to say it's going to be better.
No, he doesn't want the. He's not. We're not reboring the 12-inch Gangut.
No, he said in place of reboring, go for the Gangut's 12-inch.
Yeah. Oh god, that looks like a. Wait, are those two blokes? Oh no, for a second, I didn't.
They have
notice,
a crane.
I didn't notice the really two of Germany's strongest blokes. For a second there. Yeah, Grey Ghost again. We've seen that question.
Again, that was for your entire question.
Let's just, Rune asks, let's just say Mao Zedong didn't make the sudden transformation from maybe break some eggs to keep things under control Mao to burn down the fucking hen house and blame the capitalists, and for some reason remain reasonable. He stays close with the USSR and doesn't do the great lead forwards, thus a stronger China. Do you think the free countries in Asia, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, would better collaborate earlier to deal with a potential Chinese threat.
It wasn't just domestic Chinese things that caused the Sino-Soviet split. There was territorial disputes. There was the Soviets looking at the personality cult that Mao very much had always had about him, as particularly the Soviets post-Stalin, because they came out of that and they wanted nothing to do with that.
Didn't the fact that they'd vilified Stalin cause a massive rift? I remember reading about that
Yes.
in a Chinese history class.
Yes. Like, can't remember, it might have been Brezhnev, but
Khrushchev, I
one
think.
Soviet,
I remember reading.
either Brezhnev or Khrushchev, one of the two, wanted to do, and I quote, an emasculating nuclear strike on China over a border dispute of an island in a river with nothing on it.
I mean, wouldn't that have been a strike that the Chinese couldn't have replied to at the time?
So there was a problem. The US said we'd reply.
Wow.
Which immediately saw the Soviets back down.
I wonder why. Well, basically because a large nuclear strike on anybody is not setting a good precedent for anyone.
Well, the reason for it was, by this point, we had flipped the Chinese over to our side of the Cold War, even though they were communist.
Haha!
They were under our nuclear umbrella.
At least until they got their own nuclear umbrella.
Even afterwards, during the Cold War, they were.
China doesn't become a threat to the US until the USSR falls.
The U.S. So the Sino-American split starts with Tiananmen Square.
Oh. I didn't realize that. I didn't actually
Yes.
know that.
It killed a joint fighter development project. It killed a lot of things with the Chinese. Within that decade, you would have the stop of the sale of GE LM-2500 marine gas turbine engines. To this day, multiple ships in their fleet are still not JSF. It's what became JF-17.
Oh.
Yes. It's why they initially had a license to build Blackhawks, for example.
So basically, a lot of this thing about China copying the US is basically a misreading of what actually happened. China didn't copy the US. They just helped them.
Well, okay, the Humvees they have are a unabashed copy. And they're still producing stuff without license now that they had license and then we revoked. But so like their Humvee copy is literally the Humvee copy, for example. J31/FC31, whatever you want to call it. Probably incorporate some stuff they stole, but realistically it's a different enough airframe and completely different propulsion setup that is probably its own thing. And anybody who tries to tell you J20 is an F-22 copy is an idiot.
I mean,
We have the academic aerodynamics papers that thing stems from. It is not a copy of the 22.
I also think, look, I'm all for things being said and certain things being done, but I do think that I know that China's technically a geopolitical rival of the US, and that encourages certain thinking among certain people. But to discredit Chinese aerospace and the achievement that the J-20 is by calling it a copy is, I think,
It's literally the same line of attitude that, oh, the Japanese can't make torpedoes that are better than ours. They can't make a fighter that's better than ours.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, is J-20 better in air-to-air combat than F-22? No, not even close.
But the fact that
Is it-
China
Or
has built,
F-35, but it's still
the fact that China
a very capable aircraft.
yeah, like China's gone from building basically by themselves with some help from building.
C-Cube, the Wehrmacht didn't use 152. Zuikaku, no, they did not use 155. They used 150.
150. 5.9. The only 152s the Wehrmacht used were those they captured and had ammunition for, and they were
There's
used.
no room for that on a Tiger.
Unless you create a fixed superstructure mount with a weird box, unarmored box on top of where the turret would be.
Even then, a 128. Look at what they had to do under the King Tiger.
I know, like, dear
Instead of
God.
128, you're not doing a 150 in that.
The KV-2 was a balked mess of a tank.
6.9. What's that in millimeter? Because I'm pretty sure.
6.9, that is... no, I said... Sorry, 1 second, my calculations are wrong. 175.26 millimeters.
The U.S. has. During the Cold War, we had a 175 millimeter
yeah.
long range gun.
Like, wasn't it that there were supposed to be 3 tranches of heavy artillery in Western armies? The 155, the 175, and the 203.
I don't know about the 175. The U.S. did it. Samurai, get rid of that. That is utter retardation and would only really be
Cyclic.
good at wasting ammo.
Cyclic, you don't mean our word, do you? You mean idiocy. I know we're both of that generation, but we have to follow our own rules.
That is window-licking stupidity.
There, that'll do.
That gun is nowhere near as useful as people claim it is. Anything it can do on the modern battlefield, a 20 millimeter can do for far cheaper at far less weight.
There's a reason why the Abrams that was proposed as an anti-aircraft vehicle didn't actually have a rotary cannon. It had a pair of 35mm guns, as we see on things.
There were multiple proposed Vulcan ones. So the Vulcan is fine for an anti-aircraft gun. They're just really... Turpitz, I want you to look at that chassis.
That's not a US gun. That's one of the rare that we're lucky that still exists. Italian self-propelled 149.
That's a captured piece of equipment, dude.
Sorry. I think he was talking about the fact of how small it is compared to the guns around it.
That's for a reason. Those are the real big multi-piece guns. Those aren't actual...
Now, the plan to convert some of the unfinished Iowas into carriers never went anywhere for a basic and simple reason. That what's the point? We're building midways anyway, and we have no need for a massive carrier building program immediately post-war because we've got the midways and the last of the Essexes coming out. So why would we spend money working up a design to convert, as in, by that I mean properly beyond basic sketch, working up an Iowa class carrier conversion? And during the war, it wasn't done for the simple fact that we're at war and Japan has big scary battleships and we need big scary battleships to kill their big scary battleships. Because at that point, the concept that a carrier will always be able to sink a battleship was not
Grey Ghost,
set in stone.
we can't even answer that question.
Also, which USS Nautilus? The one that already
I
exists?
presume the first SSN. And the reason we can't answer that question is it depends
Yep.
on so many things.
It's also technically outside of my knowledge area. I know literally nothing about the specifications of USS Nautilus.
Doesn't matter if it has working torps. We can't predict what's going to happen.
The captain may decide that getting involved in... Just to really, really simply explain why by giving one example. The captain may decide getting involved will wreck the timeline and wipe his ship out of existence. And so he just goes and hides away in a corner until the war ends.
QWERTY, Wikipedia is your friend on that one. It's not something I know off the top of my head, and it's something you can Google just as fast as I can. Jesus, that's just a loading vehicle. That's the regular Hawk tractor for moving stuff around near the firing battery. That doesn't change any of this, Grey Ghost. Like, there's literally no way to answer that question.
Not without literally going and, like, just Jesus. Kylid asks a very Wikipedia is your friend. You already got that one, Cyclic, I remember. I was busy doing something else.
Yes, some of the Liberty ships did get 1 or 2 5-inch 25s, I think it typically was. I think. I'm not sure. But they would have been single mount if they got them.
Now, I've always been fascinated by the LTV-7 and the armed variant that came off of it. Like, it just looks both the armed and unturreted.
It's a 105 howitzer.
It just looks goofy. It's like
there's an AA gun version as well, I think, that has twin 40mm Bofors on it.
Oh, that's just goofy.
So, Turpitz, if memory serves, I think the Italian Air Force is slated to get some SAMP-T. And is also going to be getting a land-based CAM-ER to replace Spada.
Khalid, really simple answer. It's the modern US Navy. What do you think's gonna happen? I'm sorry to say this, but you probably should have thought of the answer to this one before it,
Khalid, let me put it to you this way. The lowest end of the US Navy's standoff anti-ship capability is capable of putting a 250-pound blast charge through the turret faceplate of Yamato, with the precision to hit anywhere they want on the ship. It's dirt cheap, it's dirt simple. And it is capable of tracking moving targets.
The U-boats are just fucking
And
gone.
even outside of that, a tail-fused GBU-12 will punch right down in the magazine of any ship in existence in World War II. And they can do it while completely safe from any sort of attack.
Yep. And all the U-boats are just gone, whether they're surfaced or not. Doesn't matter. The ASW escorts and helicopters are just going to find them and kill them with extreme
So Arnat,
prejudice.
JSAL, so this is JSAL-C. JSAL-C has a broach warhead. The first part of that broach warhead is a shaped charge designed to blast through things. I have done the math on myself and somebody else has done the math on how much steel that can cut through, even that kind of steel, okay? It will handedly put its 250-pound charge that's behind that blast frag, or behind that shaped charge, through the hole into the turret.
It's hard
It's
to...
because JSAL-C is also designed to knock out hardened land targets.
Grey Ghost. Can I just deal with this for a second? Cyclic.
Stop asking the old history questions like this, Grey Ghost.
Like, there's a reason why I've stopped addressing them quite beyond simple yes/no answers, Grey Ghost, because they're such small changes that it's... I only answer questions that are going to lead me off on an entire rambling's worth of discussion. Like the one that led to the Red Fleet timeline, which was several ramblings long. Because I felt it was worth exploring, and the changes were something I could relatively easily discuss with a good panel of co-hosts. It took me three ramblings with multiple different people to get it sorted. A simple question like that is just a congratulations, they've got better tanks, they kill some German tanks and go back to the US. That's it. And I have to be in a certain mood to deal with long-form alt history questions. There's a reason why I have very special alt history dry docks. Because most of the time, any alt history question worth answering requires me to actually give a full session for it. Or a good part of a full session for it. And requires me to make sure I've got the panel lined up of some of my good friends who I can bounce ideas off of, and who can bounce ideas off of me to ensure we create what is essentially a fanfiction. It's not going to be an accurate timeline, because I've got a newsflash for you: no alt history ever written has ever been such. It's all just fanfiction of what people think will happen. Doesn't matter how well researched it is, doesn't matter how well created it is, it's all just glorified fanfiction. And it always has been.
Okay, I saw some stuff pop up. The first one I'll handle. The second one I'm going to have to ask a question before I can handle it. So the first one, anti-ship missiles versus armor. Alright, so Soviet Styx missile, more than capable of punching through the belt armor of an Iowa. It's a giant-shaped charge, big and not the kind that you think of when you think of like a heat charge. No, it's literally just a giant-shaped charge designed to blow through and do a ton of damage regardless. Shaped charges don't have to rely on a metal heat or a metal jet that they are sending through like a heat anti-tank does. It is literally just forcing all of that blast energy in one direction. Styx has this. AS4 Kitchen, depending on what sources you look at, a lot of the Soviet sources point to it being something similar to a brooch, where you have an initial shaped charge and then a follow-on charge. And then Granite has this massive armor-piercing warhead. Taiwanese missiles, similar thing. There were several potential missiles in the West that you could argue that. So generally speaking, it is what made the battleship obsolete was not the aircraft carrier. I mean, eventually the advent of all-weather strike aircraft and day-night strike capability would, but what made it obsolete before that was the guided missile. It does the job better with far less tonnage, far more accuracy, and you can do so at standoff.
And the other question, you said you would have to ask a question.
The other one, somebody asked about the Advanced Combat Rifle program. Which program? Are you referring to the current one that the Army is attempting to procure SIGs? Or are you referring to the actual ACR program? Oh, that was stupid. I honestly, personally, I think all of them have been stupid, including this most recent one. There's no reason to replace small bore high velocity. The reason so many rounds get fired in infantry combat is not because soldiers can't hit targets. It's because soldiers aren't even trying to hit targets. They're trying to suppress so they can maneuver and then force the enemy out of position or kill them with grenades.
I feel like I need to do because I feel like I get a lot of questions that are being asked of me. I want to make something completely clear. I'm the Fleet of Oceans. There is a joke about me being Discount Drakenfell. I started that joke for a reason. Because I am not a historian. I am not an expert. I don't know enough about any of the things I talk about to be considered an expert. I am a general person who answers general questions in layman's terms with layman's knowledge. I have certain areas in which I have knowledge that might be considered approaching an expert. Cyclic knows what he's talking about on certain topics, but I can't say that I do on any of the things I talk about. I will do my best to answer questions, but there are some things I'm going to have to throw up my hands and say, I don't know. Like a lot of this stuff that Cyclic and Phoenix are talking about, completely over my head. You wouldn't even be able to have these questions answered if Cyclic wasn't here. Anyway, sorry, Cyclic, carry on.
I mean, I'd already said what I wanted to say. Like, the idea of we're going to make firing multiple rounds like firing one so we increase hit probability is dumb. Right? The idea, to be brutally honest, that we need this high power 6.8 millimeter cartridge to turn light cover into concealment, or because body armor or whatever, is stupid, because you are cutting down on the volume of rounds that infantry can carry, and you are increasing the weight of their rifle. They are not going to be as combat effective because they are not going to be able to suppress. The whole idea that we can make up for that with accuracy has never borne out in history. Never. Volume of fire and suppression is what carries the day in infantry combat.
Always has been, since firearms were created.
Because you have to suppress the enemy so you can maneuver on them to either kill them with your own fire then, or get into position to use grenades and go into close combat. Okay, that's just from an infantry perspective. Once you have initiated infantry combat, realistically, what has already decided your combat is the combined arms team. Whether that's tanks, IFVs, and infantry and artillery, or infantry, artillery, and aviation, or any combination thereof. Okay, that has likely already decided the outcome of that infantry action.
You know what? I could appreciate that. Okay, that's... Okay, now that's a... See, now Gregos, that sort of question, a little, like, a not that doesn't expect a serious answer, that I'm fine with, because that's very much within my experience. For example, what if World War I was fought like a Battlefield 1 server? Well, basically, you'd have, like, assuming it was just a small section of the front like those servers are, it would last for about 2 minutes before both sides' high commands realise what's going on, and the area is blanketed by gas and shell artillery barrage for about 20 minutes solid. And that's it.
Okay, now, a couple things. Do the quick one first here. Arnat, it's for directing the blast into the ship. Missiles that aren't generally are focused on detonating after already impacting and penetrating through the side of the ship. And even some shape charge ones will be able to do that too. Now, for gunnery officer, why didn't the U.S. just go with a 20mm armed M113? Because it wouldn't have been an IFE. It still would have been an APC. The M113 did not have the level of protection to stick there in the fight with the infantry. It wasn't protected against 14.5 frontally, and the initial versions of Bradley were. And very quickly later on, Bradley would get additional armor for 30mm protection over a very broad frontal arc. And 14.5 protection all around. And M113 is not protected against 12.7mm frontally. Okay, it's barely protected against 7.62 AP side on. So in its later guises, they would get better protection against 7.62mm AP on the sides, but it's still not frontally protected against 50 cal outside of what the engine block blocks. Which is not a good thing, because your engine just gets shredded and you have no mobility. The focus wasn't so much on Vietnam. The Vietnam was a lot of infantry action, APCs were doing fine there.
And an
The main
RPG
problem-
an RPG is going to kill something like a
Bradley or
something like
an APC just fine. Same with a mine. That was the real big killer of vehicles. The main focus was on the protection, mobility, and firepower that IFVs offered infantry in a high-end mechanized war in Europe. I would describe Warrior as an APC and not actually as an IFV, despite the fact it has 30 mil. And that would be because its turret is hand cranked both in elevation and traverse, and it's not stabilized. And it is a 3-round clip-fed, manually loaded autocannon.
I'd agree.
It's not an IFV; it's an APC.
I'd agree.
Um,
Like, I used to be this... I mean, it's mainly thanks to you, Cycle, because I got out of all the idiotic views I used to hold. For example, you remember how I was when we first met? Dear God. Still wedded to the idea of battleships and other nonsense of that nature.
yeah, I kind of had to beat that out of you with a barbed wire studded baseball bat.
Still, I'm very glad you did. I feel like a much smarter person for it.
Turpits, yeah, they are used in frontline roles. I mean, not the least of which in this current conflict in Europe, and elsewhere. But for example, the U.S. has an entire brigade combat team based around an 8x8 IFV, or 8x8 APC. The Danes, most of their mechanized units are in Piranhas. Those are APCs. The Finns, they have a lot of troops in APCs. The Russians, a lot of troops in APCs. The Poles, same thing. The Romanians, same thing. The Brits are about to go fully APC. Well, if you want to count Warriors and IFE, which I don't, I would say the Brits have always been APC. There are a lot of APCs used in frontline combat roles because it requires a lot of money to standardize all of your mechanized forces on IFVs. They generally don't have the same troop carrying capacity because you have to fit the weapon systems and ammo in there. And because of the weapon systems and ammo and other more advanced systems that go in, they're a lot more expensive. So they could have equipped Sheridan Gunnery Officer with an M68 105 mil. They didn't, and it's because the U.S. Army had a view at the time that the gun-launched ATGM was the future for anti-tank work.
It's the same
That's why they
reason
went
we
with
got
that
Starship.
and the M60A2. They also, they had trialed one with the 76. They had trialed one with a 105, and the 105 worked perfectly fine and caused less of an issue than that short barrel 152. Because it's a 152, it's not a 155.
Khalid, he doesn't mean all APC in terms of all armored vehicles being APCs. He means all APC in terms of all your
infantry transport.
So obviously, no army in the world is going to be stupid enough to abandon its MBTs.
You say that.
No, if it needs them.
Hang on. You say that, but pre-Ukraine war, it was pretty clear that was what was going to happen to the British Army.
Luckily, I'm not going to finish the sentence because saying "luckily the Ukrainian war came along" is not a sentence I should really say.
And to be honest, I still don't know what the heck the. If Ben Wallace were to enter this voice chat, Phoenix, I would rip him a new one.
Who the fuck's Ben Wallace? Never heard of him.
Former Minister of Defense.
Oh. I mean, you've talked a lot, Cyclic, about the whole,
Strike Brigade was stupid. The whole idea that he was trying to push of basing Prince of Wales out of Australia was stupid. The idea that he wanted to put forward that the RN can waddle around in the Pacific as a major player is a joke. The RN simply does not have the capabilities
welcome
to to show up in the Pacific and expect to be anything other than a second line escort force for our convoy.
Welcome to...
And even then it can't.
Yeah. Welcome to British politicians still thinking in terms of the good old days of the Grand Fleet and not realising what the UK actually is. Yeah. I've lost count of the...
Like, I hate to say this about the Royal Navy, but when your only anti-ballistic missile capability in your debut voyage of your carrier is a single US destroyer that is there basically doing the naval equivalent of the world's strongest man deadlift,
Yeah.
it's pretty embarrassing.
Deathshot, I don't think you're right on the fact the RN's not a major navy anymore, but it can't play equally. It's a major navy in the sense it still operates nuclear-powered attack submarines. It still operates.
Well, it's what Phoenix said. It's a major navy with a lot of capability gaps that mean it's not very functional against modern threats.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to. Yeah.
It is still a major navy, though it is a major navy who. So, I would classify it probably as a third-rate navy, if I'm honest.
Honestly, that would.
But
I'd agree with that.
Because of lack of capability. One capability, and that is meaningful air-delivered anti-ship capability.
Okay. You really think that's the one thing holding us back?
The difference between having a carrier air group that can do sea control and not having a carrier air group that can do sea control is the difference in controlling millions of square miles of ocean versus hundreds. So yes.
Because F-35 can't do that.
Not with the munitions that you guys currently have for your F-35Bs.
Oh, so F-35 can do it if we get the munitions.
You just have to have the munitions. You need to buy Joint Strike Missile.
Any indication we're going to? Or are we just being stupid
Maybe.
as usual?
I've heard some stuff that's under Chatham House rules, so I'm not going to say who it's come from.
I'm sorry, Khaled, but any indication that the Royal Navy can call on the full might of the British Commonwealth? I don't know what papers you've been reading.
What might of the British Commonwealth?
Exactly, yeah. But even if we could call upon it, which we can't anyway.
Like, the
Commonwealth-
Australian Navy has a better working relationship in terms of fighting at sea with the United States Navy, and so does the Royal Canadian Navy.
The RN's been playing in its own little ballpark for the last 40
And
years.
the Royal Canadian Navy is the Halifaxes, which only have ship self-defense capability for anti-air warfare.
Yep.
And are pretty dinky patrol frigates with an ASW capability to begin with. The Royal New Zealand Navy might as well not exist. The Royal Australian Navy is currently has 3 light air warfare destroyers and some patrol frigates that also have an anti-submarine capability, but not a great one. The Anzacs, as the Australians have them, are dramatically better than the Halifax class frigates, but they're not even in a guided missile frigate category. Which, to be fair, the RN doesn't seem to understand that guided missile frigates are useful. So... And the Royal New Zealand Navy is a joke. They haven't even updated their Anzacs like the Australians did. And don't get me started on the Type 26 and how much of a disappointment it really is.
Well... Does South Africa...
It's got a radar that belongs on an LCS.
South Africa has a navy, unless I'm forgetting things.
Not a very good one.
Well, of course, I figured that was kind of obvious.
and it's not one you want to call on, and it's not one that would answer the call anyways.
South Africa's been in a weird place since the end of Dominion. They basically shot themselves in the foot for the majority of the Cold War period by insisting on a backward and brutal policy towards a large portion of its population. And then once that ended, things improved, but also didn't improve at the same time. But that's all I'll say.
I'll let Phoenix handle the thing about U.S. Cold War designations. I don't feel like hitting that one
Fair
for
enough.
the number of time I can't count.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, if you put the entirety of all of Europe's fleet, including the UK, together, it still won't match the USN in any way that matters.
To be brutally honest, if you pair every single navy up on this planet, barring the People's Liberation Army Navy,
Plan.
Pac Fleet could take them. Forget Atlantic Fleet. You throw the plan in, okay, then the U.S. Navy needs to actually throw its full weight in. Yeah, I just said that, and it's true. Germany's navy currently owns the Baltic Sea,
As in, do you mean
which
it's
is pretty reasonable for its role.
As in, do you mean it's unchallengeable in the Baltic Sea?
Nobody else could challenge it.
How far the Russian Baltic Fleet has fallen?
It's not that it's fallen, it's that the Germans have put money into serious warships. And serious numbers of very capable corvettes. The Baltic Fleet has gotten more capable, but nowhere near as capable as the Bundesmarine.
Indeed. I think that's very much true. I mean, the German Navy is only going to get more capable with this. Oh no, sorry, this new stimulus package is all going into the German army.
No, a good chunk of it's going into their navy too. It's being used to fund a lot of projects that have been sitting on the shelf in purgatory.
I see what you mean. I mean, the German modern air independent propulsion SSKs are downright terrifying opponents for any submarine to face. Even a new boat.
Depends. If you're out in the open ocean, they're not.
Well, yeah, I meant in their environment.
Well, you don't really send nuclear boats into the Baltic. I mean, you can send like a Virginia or an Astute in there if you want to, but there's not much of a point. It's also incredibly dangerous to do, just from a
Okay, the Russian Baltic Fleet had a renaissance.
oceanography perspective.
Okay, the Russian Baltic Fleet had a renaissance before the First World War and after the Second World War.
And during the Cold War, it was a very capable fighting force that had the Danes scared shitless and the Swedes scared shitless.
Why do you think the Sverriers didn't go away until the Gangers did?
They both went away for the same reason. It wasn't the other.
No, I know, but still.
Yes, the Luftwaffe will be getting money. It's actually, I think, what these F-35As are being bought with. So.
Why is the German Army the Bundeswehr, which is a name change, the German Navy is the Bundesmarine, which is a name change, but why is the German Air Force still the Luftwaffe and not the...
Perception. For whatever reason, it was seen as honorable by the Allies, and domestically, they were the ones protecting the skies from the bombers. They weren't the ones seen as going out and slaughtering whole populations, even though they were probably the singular most Nazi-infected branch of the military,
Yeah.
outside of Well, the armed wing of the Nazi Party.
Mhm.
Hell, they were led by a Nazi post-war when they rebuilt. Yeah, and also, like Phoenix said, don't ask what their ground troops were doing
Yeah.
or how they were getting their aircraft.
No, Grey Ghost. That's, no. 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 Luftstalags were a really minor thing.
Tirpitz, nuclear boats operate all the time in the Mediterranean Sea.
I mean, the big advantages of nuke boats is their ability to put on the power when they need... No, the Italians do not operate nuke
Wordy, the
boats.
Italians do not operate any nuclear.
The only nations, as far as I'm aware, that operate nuke boats are Britain, France, the United States, the Soviet Russia, and China.
India does too.
Wait, India's got nuke boats since when?
Technically leased from Russia, but they've got them.
Aren't they trying to build their own nuke boats as well?
They're thinking about it. Brazil is also on contract with the French to build a class of SSN. And like Australia will be with AUKUS. Yeah, I think they did cut the steel on it. So it's a pretty restrictive club.
Basically, because of the entry requirements, you've got to have a workable, compact.
They're some of the
reactor.
most complex things built by humanity.
Grey Ghost, no. The simple fact that battleships.
Battleship construction doesn't work like that. Generally speaking, it is the slipways, the dry docks, and the manpower that is the restriction on how fast you build battleships or any large ships in general. It's not steel shortage issues generally.
It's only if you let
Unless you're building a crazy amount of vessels like the U.S. was in World War II, where the U.S. ran into high quality steel bottlenecks.
And of course, or if you're the UK in the early 30s, realizing that your forging capacity for armor steel and guns has diminished to a point where no, you can't build a class of 6 battleships simultaneously anymore. Your typical gunnery officer, the Perrys could have done far better. Ridiculously so.
It depends. On the one hand, they have SM1, so that would benefit them against Sea Skimmer. And they have, phalanx is a thing, so having on your AAW combatants a point defense system would help. The fact that they are more capable AAW combatants than the Type 42s also would help. And that they have a gun that could be used in an air defense role in restricted areas like San Carlos Water. But it's only going to help so much. The primary thing you need in the Falklands is AEW aircraft and fighters that can get out and do bar cap with proper BVR weaponry for the time.
That was the weakness of the Sea Harrier, no BVR.
Well, the biggest problem here was not having airborne radar.
That's the big thing.
And I don't just mean like Crow's Nest or its predecessor. I actually mean like something that's sitting high and can search cruise altitude all the way down to the surface.
Yeah, I know. You want E2. You need
Even the old British one that they had before the retirement of their Catabar capability would have been a huge impact. That would have been the biggest single thing. If they had those Catabar carriers still intact and available, they probably wouldn't have lost ships, because they would have been able to actually intercept the inbound raids. Because they would have been able to see them coming. They would have been able to maneuver their standing cap that's in the air out, and then launch their alert aircraft and get out there and seriously intercept them. But yes, the parries would have helped. They probably would have done better than the Type 42s. But you still would lose ships. Because quite frankly, nobody in that time period had a reasonable capability to intercept sea skimming anti-ship missiles like Exocet that flew that low and were that small. SM2 and SM1 are kind of marginal on things like Mosquite, and Mosquite flies almost twice as high as Exocet. You might be able to hit Exocet with SM1. You certainly would be able to do far, far, far better against the low-flying A4s than Sea Dart could. And most of that is just down to Sea Dart's anemically slow rate of fire.
And the fact that it's not that good of a missile, period.
It was perfectly adequate for intercepting A4s if they only flew in one at a time, because of that rate of fire issue.
But they didn't just fly in one at a time.
No, they didn't, because they knew the system.
Because the Argentinians also had Type 42s.
You also just don't... No, they could not. They were nowhere near as big as a Midway gunnery officer. They weren't even as big as an Essex.
It's also not what the RN needed. The RN doesn't need F-14.
Well, given the operational environment and the high-end fight, you actually could make that argument that they did. But that's not really part of this question. The F-14s could not reasonably operate off of a Midway, let alone a light fleet.
Operating the British F-4s was a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But the RN just about managed it.
That's why they had to put that extra jack on the front landing gear. Because without that extra couple feet of nose up, the Phantoms would go into the water.
Yep. It's also part of
the Forrestalls couldn't use one of their 4 catapults with the F4s. Realistically, all they could launch off of that catapult anyways was an A4 Skyhawk, but that was kind of dumb that it was put on, if you ask me, but they were 1950s carriers.
Yeah. And in the 1950s, that catapult could launch pretty much everything, but that didn't last very long.
It would have helped a lot in getting the King George V's out faster, Grey Ghost. But that's all it's really going to help get out. They might have bothered to try to put together some heavy cruiser classes. I don't know. I'll let Phoenix talk more about that.
The RN was wedded to the idea of the 6-inch cruiser as the future of the RN. They looked at heavy cruisers, but they just decided it wasn't. Like they were looking at the way 6-inch rate of fire was going, and they were looking at the way 6-inch shells were able to penetrate more and more armor, and they basically said the 8-inch cruiser was a product of the 20s, when the difference in penetration and rate of fire meant that an 8-inch cruiser was a viable thing that you would build. I mean, the proof of the pudding is shown in the performance of things like the later model towns, like Sheffield and Belfast, in operations against things like Scharnhorst. The range on those modern 6-inch guns and the modern mountings, the penetration of some of their shells against the weaker parts of Scharnhorst's armor scheme, proved the point beautifully.
So, gunnery officer, CVA-01,
Having that
I mean, it would've been-
cancelled was a good
it would have been helpful, but, like, again, it's not that big of an improvement over the light fleets practically for the Falklands War. And it's a rather inefficient carrier layout, to be brutally honest.
I mean, in the Conways that was written in the late 90s that covered all the ships up to the fall of the Soviet Union, basically, it quite bluntly says the best thing that happened to the Royal Navy in the 60s was the cancelling of that project. Because it would have been a waste of money. Comparatively. It offers you a newer ship with newer machinery, but arguably it gets you a less capable hull than the ones you're replacing.
Well, you just don't get enough of them to really meaningfully replace. That's the problem.
Grey Ghost, which British carriers? Can you specify, please? Because there were a lot of ships in refit. And what time period? One could argue that every ship's in perpetual refit all the time. Could you please specify? As Cyclic says, the deck layout is very inefficient. The ones from post-World War II, there are several different carriers of several different designs post-World War II, and to be brutally honest, I can't do better than what the RN did with the budget it got. The only way I can do better is if I get the Maltas. If I don't get the Maltas, I can't do better than what the RN did with the carriers it had. Simple as that. The only thing I can do is stop the RN from botching Victorious' refit, but that's pretty much it. I am very much like Drac in that aspect. The post-World War II is really not my area of expertise. When the gun stops being relevant as an anti-shipping weapon, that's when my naval expertise dies.
You're really not doing better than what the RN did without the Maltas.
Yeah.
The Maltas, because those light fleet carriers, first of all, they aren't even full fleet carriers in World War II. They are light fleet carriers. It's sort of like a halfway house between an Independence and an Essex. Okay? They're not ideal carriers. They're certainly not good fleet carriers. The RN needed the Maltas to get built. I think, to be brutally honest, I think if the Maltas had gotten built, I don't think the RN would have been forced to give up Catobar capability. I think the RN probably would have been flying, well, the Fleet Air Arms / RAF, given the weird mix, probably would have been flying Legacy Hornets right up until
the 2000s.
At least the 90s, or at earliest the 90s, potentially they would have kept them longer.
If Midway can be refitted as aggressively as she was, there's no reason the Maltas couldn't have the same.
The other thing potentially is at some point in the 90s they could have swapped over to either a carrier version of Eurofighter or a Super Hornet. Super Hornet's around the same size as the Phantom.
Yeah, and also it's worth pointing out that there's something else here that we need to mention, which is going to help the RN massively, which is economies of scale in an argument to make to the Ministry of Defence. If you've got 4 Maltas, you can rotate them. You've got commonality of parts. You've got enough hulls.
It's not even that. They're new ships. They haven't been running to the ground.
Well,
they don't have all the maintenance problems and the costs associated with them.
Oh no, that as well. That's the main thing. But you've also got the addition. You've also got another stick on top of that to hit the Ministry of Defence idiots over the head with. Whenever they come waving a white paper at you. The Maltas and the Midways are about the same size, which a lot of people forget. The Maltas was supposed to be the UK's first carrier that was catching up to the US in terms of raw size. Sea Dodders has a good rebuild of the Maltas that he did in naval art that was pretty close to what they might have looked like at the time of the Falklands War. We can't know exactly, but I think Sea Dodders did a good job of it. Would the RN have done better with a combo of SPDs, Seafires, and Swordfish? You know, of course they would have. Get rid of the
Yeah, they would have had an actual fighter.
and a dive bomber that could carry a bomb load greater than two 500-pound bombs on its wings, and was significantly more survivable. And the Swordfish already proved itself as a torpedo bomber. Doesn't need replacing, at least at first.
For the naval combat that the RN got itself into, yes.
Yes. Well, yeah. If the RN has SPDs, Bismarck might get a visit from a few 1,000-pound bombs, which would be kind of hilarious to see. Oh no, the Barracuda was a later war design. No, Khalid. Well, also, the Queen Elizabeth don't have catapults. At least not yet. The Queen Elizabeths are Stovall. There we go. Yeah, sorry about that. I got my wires crossed. I mean, it depends if Lexington's TBDs have working torpedoes.
I mean, Grey Ghost, Lexington's Arrowing would have mopped the floor on Bismarck.
Grey Ghost, so are the Swordfish. So are B5Ns. B5N, Swordfish, TBD, they're all the same vintage.
Well, the Devastator actually was far newer than the Swordfish, and was when it came in, it was the most modern. One of the best torpedo bombers on the planet. It's just that with the pace of aircraft development at the start of World War II, it was already hugely outpaced.
Indeed.
I mean, a Swordfish would be able to take off from Huey, it's just there's no catapult to launch her. She doesn't need it anyways.
No. The way that the modular refits of the QEs are supposed to work is that they keep the catapults, they gain an angled deck. No, sorry, they keep the ski jump, they gain an angled deck. I think it's either 1 or 2 catapults integrated into it.
That's not... We don't have hard information on what's going to happen with them yet. There's no way that it's supposed to work right now. The RN is still trying to study what they want to do.
Grey Ghost.
Right now, the RN is seriously concerned about their lack of strike range and mass, and their inability to meaningfully defend the carrier at range. They recognize that Merlin Crow's Nest is not viable. It kills their capability to use Merlin in an ASW manner. And also it takes an obscene amount of time to move the Merlin from the hangar to the flight deck, and you can't store the Merlin on the flight deck because it's not a truly Marinized version of the helicopter that the RN has. It can't deal with cold soak like the Sea King could.
Yeah. Well, no,
The second island is there by dint of it being a conventional carrier and needing somewhere to trunk the funneling through Grey Ghost. They have the forward island so far forward because they want it there for navigation purposes.
It's just handy that the second island gave them a place to put... Is it air ops, I think?
So, Rune, Ford's catapult can dial its launching speed to whatever it needs to do, because it's not steam.
Tennant, what I've said is what I suspect. I don't know. Like as Cyclic said, I don't know. I'm just saying what I thought. I'm not I don't know. Don't take what I've said as gospel. Don't quote me on that. The naval... Gregos, you don't have to ping me. I am reading chat. I've told you this before. You don't have to ping me. Guys, I'm reading the text. You don't have to ping me. I'm fine, honestly. Yes, there was a naval hurricane with 20 mils. That's the Italian...
Yes, Turpitz knows. Turpitz knows that's Cavor.
Well, yeah, of course he does. He's Italian. What am I bloody saying? Like, it's... What's the ship in the background to her, though?
That is Garibaldi, I believe.
The size difference is marked.
Yes.
Christ, Garibaldi's a small boy. Like... Christ, that's a tonnage difference.
And Cavor is smaller than what I'd use as a base for
Hang on, 1 second.
a light carrier to begin with.
After this. Grey Ghost, what do you think the Hurricane was fitted with? The Hurricane and the Spitfire have the same nose shape for a reason. They both have Merlins. Actually, that's a question you might be able to answer, Cyclic, because I have no idea. Why was the US Gunnery Officer asks, why was the USAF reluctant in using the 20mm cannons on their fighters, while the USN equipped 20mm cannons on the night variant of the Hellcat?
I mean, the reality is most versions of the Hellcat didn't have 20mm cannons. And the night version of the Hellcat really wasn't distributed well at all. It was not common, even on ships like Enterprise or Saratoga, that actually had the original CVN, where N meant night, designator. So even Hellcats that had radar for night, had a lot of them had 50 cals. But yeah, the US, the primary night fighter the US AAF had, the Black Widow, did come equipped with quite a large number of 20mm cannons, and an additional gunner-operated turret that had 450 cals in it. By and large, the logic comes down to, even when you see this in jets where 50 cals are still being used, the U.S. Navy very quickly went to 20mm cannons post-World War II, where the U.S. AAF and later AF did not. And it comes down... You don't need to ping me, Grey Ghost. Do not ping me again. I'm not going to ask next time.
See, Grey Ghost, this is why I've kept trying to tell you throughout the last few ramblings, because eventually you were going to run into Cyclic, and he's not as nice and forgiving as I am.
You've been warned multiple times. You do it again, you're going to get the same thing that happened to somebody last week.
You were saying?
The U.S. Navy moved to 20 mils post-war very quickly because of their experience against kamikazes. That is the number one reason the U.S. Navy, when you look at the post-World War II era, and I'm shifting to that for a reason, and it's the difference in interception versus fighter. The U.S. Air Force would stick with 50 cal until later versions of the Sabre, largely because, well, 50 cal had always been good enough for fighter on fighter, and it's lighter weight, so you get more performance out of your aircraft. Ounces matter when making a fighter. Pounds matter when making a fighter. You get more ammunition for less weight, and aerial gunnery is ammunition expensive anyways. even with a fancy radar lead computing gun sight like what the Sabre had. But the Navy was more focused on the pilot needs to be able to drop the inbound threat right away because they're doing fleet defense. They're doing fleet air defense. The U.S. Navy really took away from the massed kamikaze raids that how you break naval air defense is hundreds of inbound threats at minimum, if not thousands, and you need to be able to cut through them quickly. And the 20mm for them provided a great balance of lethality but ammunition count and weight. And you've seen this to this day with aircraft right up into the F-35 and AV-8B Harrier, and the main reason for the gun on both of those is for strafing soft targets on the ground, which the extra filler you get from a 5mm larger diameter shell matters. So the US never really went into 30mm save one aircraft, and was 20mm for basically everything else, barring two.
I mean, 20mm is a good caliber for air-based.
Yeah,
work.
it's that balance of lethality, ammunition storage, and weight.
Okay.
Other nations have decided on 27, 30, 35mm, but the US has largely went from 50 to 20 and stayed there.
Gunnery officer asks, thoughts on removing cannons and guns in 1960s US fighters like Phantoms, and they didn't continue improving their dogfight. Okay, we've got some myth busting to do.
I'll address this. So gunnery officer. Fun fact, the F-4 Phantom's kill ratio in Vietnam, when a gun was added to it by the US Air Force, it went down. The Navy's went up and they didn't add a gun. What mattered was training the pilot to fight, not the gun. Simply adding a gun got more pilots killed. More Phantoms shot down by enemy aircraft. Meanwhile, the Navy never added a gun. They just taught their pilots how to fight. That whole myth about the gun is exactly that, a myth. It did not help. The Air Force thought it did, but the Air Force has never been very good at actually looking at data analysis when you look at it historically. They started to get good at it in the late 80s, and that's where you have the stupid defense reformers come out and try to rebel against it. Like, don't get me wrong, the fighter mafia was very useful for driving a stake through the shoulder of the bomber mafia and pinning them in place where they needed to be and they couldn't get out. But after that, they weren't very useful.
Also, weren't there, I'm not sure if you've already mentioned this, but weren't there moronic rules of engagement that were hamstrung on US aviators?
Generally not in air-to-air. That wasn't too much of a thing in air-to-air. There were more ROE no-shoot calls in Desert Storm than there were in Vietnam, if memory serves.
Those not in the know, ROE rules of engagement, just in case anyone's not familiar.
The rules of engagement thing for air power in Vietnam was an air-to-ground thing.
Understandably
not
so.
an air-to-air. They had to confirm they weren't friendly, but that could be done multiple ways.
And it was also somewhat easy.
If you were doing a fighter sweep and your Finger 4 Phantoms were the only people in the area, and you knew that for certain, everything that came up was hostile or potential hostile.
And of course, let's not forget that they're fighting aircraft who have rather distinctive radar.
Well, it's even visually because that era, because we're not talking about the dual pulse Sparrows here. We're talking about the monopulse. Which, by the way, Skyflash was a monopulse. It was not the best version of Sparrow ever made. It did have the early semi-active improvements, but it doesn't really hold a candle to the later Sparrows, despite the fact that it continued to be used. With this era of Sparrow, they're really there for your engagement towards the merge with another fighter. They are very useful in that fact because this is the era of rear aspect only infrared guided weapons. So they give you a capability to engage as you close. Air Force pilots and Navy pilots really weren't taught that until we started teaching it. What do you mean was the Sky Radar in Vietnam? The sentries, E2s, E1s,
Yeah, were the
like tracer,
Yeah, was
tracker.
I'm
Yeah, they were hugely important at calling out bogeys, and in many cases, targets didn't even have to be visually confirmed because we saw where the planes launched from on radar.
just very quickly before we go on to more questions on Vietnam. I'll very quickly answer Khaled's question about how likely it was for a lone merchant on its own to be attacked and sunk by submarines and ships in the first few years of World War II. If you were flying a flag that was hostile to Nazi Germany or Italy in the first 3 years of the Second World War,
it's sort of dumb luck if they come across you or not.
Like if a U-boat surfaces, or if a U-boat sees you on the surface and you are not one of those merchantmen that are armed, like, here's the thing, if you're an armed merchantman, that means you're either likely to, if you're very, very lucky, damage a U-boat enough that it is mission killed and therefore goes away to go back to port, or the U-boat just doesn't surface and engages you with torpedoes from the start. This doesn't help you if a Hilfskreuzer, or, God forbid if your luck's really bad, a pocket battleship or Scharnhorst or Gneisenau comes over the horizon. In that case, it doesn't matter how heavily armed a merchantman you are, you're dead.
Okay.
Anyway, back to...
The U.S. didn't immediately equip the Phantoms for SEAD. The first aircraft to get the SEAD mission were Thuds. I think either that or the twin seat F1 somethings. And what that came about was they took electronic warfare officers from B-52s, threw them in the back seats. I think it was 105s, yeah. That would be the Thud. Threw them in the back seat, gave them anti-radiation missiles, and went, here's how these things work. Go figure it out, boy. And the B-52 electronic warfare officers were decidedly not happy about this. But they did their job, and that's where the Wild Weasels come from. Phantoms would later on get it, because the Phantom is by far and away more maneuverable than a Thud, which gives you a heck of a lot better chance at surviving. And the Phantom was also a strike fighter. The Phantom really was a multi-role jet fighter of its era. And that made it very, the fact that it was a two-seer made it very, very enticing to outfit what would later become SEAD squadrons and Wild Weasel squadrons for that role. Later on, you would, as the technology advanced, you would start seeing A7s get that role. In addition to Phantom-based Wild Weasel squadrons. but that was because as the technology matured, you could do that as a single-seat pilot, where initially you couldn't.
So, we talked about. Just, I'd like to very quickly. Oh, there's a quick question. When did Harms come into service?
80s. Before that, before Harm, you have Standard Arm and you have Shrike. Shrike being the most common because Standard Arm was ridiculously expensive. It was more common in Navy service, but it required a lot of sign-off and approval to use, even though it was by far and away the better missile when compared to Shrike. Harm is a dramatically better missile than both, but it also has its own suite of problems that really weren't solved until ARGM.
Anti-radar sidewinder? I don't think there's ever been an anti-radar sidewinder.
Yeah, there has sidearm.
Oh, really? Well, shows what I know.
Really only used on attack helicopters like Cobras, Marine Corps Cobras, and AV-8Bs, though.
I assume basically if they're painted by a...
Yeah, it's an oh-shit weapon.
Yeah, I figured as much. Still...
And one that only works at very close range.
Then again, if you're being engaged by a gun system, you're at that very close range.
It's debatable if it even works against like 30mm gun systems in terms of range.
Like, yeah, it's basically if it's not a Shilka, you're still gonna die.
Yeah, so sidearm I think is a late 70s into the 80s sort of thing. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Standard arm would as well, gunnery. That was one of the big things that Harm did, but if you turn off your radar with Harm, it's probably still gonna miss you by a mile. It's just that it remembers your broad location in case you turn it back on. Yes, you could. That was part of with Harm. That was part of U.S. Navy strike package planning was Harms.
I mean, if you're in range to launch a harm against an enemy ship, it's already locked you up and fired a missile your way, and it's already halfway to you.
Yeah, but it might force them to turn off that fire director. So, and not necessarily as well, because we're talking about things like Still. So Naval Boog, and even early even S-300F isn't that long range. You can be flying high and fast, fire off these harms, and get away just fine.
Tenant, while I appreciate the compliment, I don't know that much. I thank you for the compliment, but I just know general history and general naval history. I'm not that knowledgeable. Cyclic knows more about certain things than I do, though. Well, to be honest, no one thought the A-10 was going to perform anything in Iraq.
Yeah, the Air Force didn't think the A-10 was going to do well at all, and to be honest, it did not even meet their expectations. So the F-111 was handedly a better ground pounder because it had a FLIR pod that it could use to paint its own targets. So it could just tank plank with laser guided bombs. And for most of the ground attack mission that were done in Desert Storm, to be honest, F-16 was far better than the A-10 because it could get in there, drop the cluster bombs, and get out.
And then, of course, let's not forget the fact that the only reason the A-10 came out of that war looking good and the F-111 looking bad is because of a massive PR campaign run by some people in Washington.
No, the F-111 did not look bad at all after that war. It was the backbone of coalition strike.
I was gonna say after the war in terms of public opinion, after the PR campaign run by some dickheads.
No, their public opinion, the F-111 was like the strongman of the air campaign for air to ground.
Then why was it retired before its time?
It was its time. The airframes were old and falling apart.
Fair enough. And to be fair, swing-wing aircraft had their day by the 2000s.
I mean, remember
for the most
that
part.
that aircraft was designed in the 60s, started to be fielded in the 70s, was used to hell and back, right? And there were F-111s used in Vietnam fleet. Like,
Weren't they,
it's older than the Eagle.
Yeah, weren't the F-111s basically something that the North Vietnamese didn't really have an answer to?
They weren't really used in meaningful numbers in
Ah,
Vietnam.
I see. Yeah, asbestos fuel tanks are painful, you can imagine.
There is a VARC in Vietnam.
I will admit the Varks do look very sexy.
Well, almost anything you put in that Southeast Asia paint scheme is going to look good.
Yeah, you have a point there. Would have loved to have seen some Navy aircraft in that, like Skyhawks and
You aren't gonna see it.
Crusaders.
Didn't make sense for their overarching mission.
Oh no, I know, but I was more just talking about it would have been nice from actually looking at it, not from a strategic standpoint.
My favorite type of cruiser is indeed the guided missile cruiser.
Changing the game. Armored. Traditional, old-fashioned, slug-out armored cruisers.
Because the Super Tomcat doesn't make sense.
It's silly. This is coming from the man who likes silly things, but but even I have my limits.
Which guided missile cruiser?
If you say bloody Long Beach, I'm going to castrate you.
Why would I say Long Beach?
Thank God for that.
Probably the Virginias, just by looks.
Are
Lion.
are those the ones that have those nice flush deck lines?
Those are the last nuclear powered guided missile
Oh,
cruisers.
I know the ones
US
you
Navy
mean.
built.
They basically take everything wrong with Long Beach and get rid of it. What was that?
I've read it. I'm just gonna say I'm glad it was deleted.
The Virginias do look nice. Really nice. It's just a nice looking ship. I don't like that scoop. That paint scheme I don't like. You're not enough brown. Well, Lion, you basically have to have the gun behind the launchers. The Long Beach had the 5-inch guns that it did because Kennedy said it's a cruiser, why doesn't it have guns? That's literally it. It's not even hyperbole, that's it.
Yeah, there was no reason that Long Beach should have had guns.
Like, Virginia had guns because the modern 5-inch that it made sense to mount on a ship like Virginia appeared.
Virginia has those guns for small watercraft defense.
And they're very good at that.
And
job.
for naval gunfire support. Like,
again,
that's it.
The modern US 5-inch is very good at both those roles. God, that Italian ship has more. That's the most gun armament I've seen on a warship in the modern era.
It's because of the Yugoslavian fast boat threat. That and the 76 millimeters were also their Sea Whiz.
I see.
They were dual-purpose secondaries with a dual-purpose primary. To be honest, Runner, it's actually going to lower your rate of fire over a short period of time, but make it more sustainable, provided your magazine depth is appropriate. Unless you're running the modern Italian 5-inch gun. At which point the Atlanta is going to capsize.
Jesus Christ, the Italians really did like their gun-based warships, didn't they? Good lord. That's enough gun to make me happy. Crikey. Can you use the 76mm as a Sea Whiz Cyclic?
Yes.
Does it work?
It's probably going to be far more effective than Phalanx, to be brutally honest.
Is that ship covered in radar-guided single Bofors mounts? Like, that's what... What is that? Is it just... Italy, please stop, you're killing me. Fucking hell. Jesus Christ. The Italian Navy post-World War II is wild. Oh God, you gotta love the Italian Navy post World War II. They came up with some concepts. What's the thinking behind the gun-heavy? Obviously, apart from the small boat threat from Yugoslavia, is there any other thought besides yes, the small Polaris?
I'll let Phoenix.
Yeah, I was addressing that to him. What was the reasoning behind all of the guns, Phoenix, and not a wider adoption of missiles? It's alright, take as much time as you need. I'll just keep looking at these ships. Oh, those single turrets aren't 40 mils as I thought. They're 76s. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of 76mm guns. That's a lot of... Wow. even now the Italian Navy's still very gun heavy.
Well, now their 76s are slinging guided munitions for Seaways and anti-surface, so...
Bloody hell, Italy, they have no chill.
The US is doing that with their 57s. Yep, the non-penetrating Seawiz mount for the 3-inch gun. Oh, and Cavor's also got VLS
Indeed.
for Aster 15.
The carriers, I actually do like the way the Italian carriers look, both Garibaldi and the other one, whose name has just escaped me. It was on the tip of my tongue a second ago. There's Charles de Gaulle in the background with its unmistakable forward superstructure. I just like the way both ships look. Like, they look very uniquely Italian. In a good way. I like... They're very well put together ergonomically, even the smaller vessel. I hate that. I've seen that ship and the thing it's part of. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. It's bad for so many reasons. Hey Tackums, I want to throw 3 of those bloody Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles at that horrific abomination against good naval architecture. Let me count the ways that is so wrong. For one, trimaran hull. So many weaknesses. Okay, see, Fisher's design... See, that's a product of its time. And it's an understandable product of its time as well. You can see the progression towards an old big gun ship. It makes sense. That's not cursed. That's just of its time. Anyone else got any other... Come on, folks. Let's have some more modern questions. I'm feeling in a really...
Oh, we're also waiting on Phoenix to
Oh, yeah, we are.
answer yours.
Oh,
but
yes, we are.
Feel free to ask questions in the interim.
Yeah, Phoenix has probably gone on to do a really thorough answer, which I thank him for. Or I will thank him for.
Well, he's also at work at the moment.
But that as well. So I appreciate taking time out of his workday to help me, which is awfully decent of him.
France needed a carrier. That was the carrier they were going to get. It's the carrier they got. It's the carrier they're going to use.
And also, I mean, Cyclic, you told me about the fact that the French new carriers is going to be what they need it to be regardless of the cost, and if needed, they'll get 2 of them. Basically for the reason that it gives them an excuse.
I suspect they're not going to end up with 2.
You think?
Yeah.
But I thought the whole point of that was to enable them to shove their bloody 6th generation carrier fighter down the throats of the Germans and the Spanish by saying there's enough.
That's the
for-
size. That's not number of carrier. Like their carriers are that size because of the size of that fighter.
Ah. No. The numbers thought that if they need 2 air wings, they can shove.
No, that's not how that works.
I stand corrected. Oh, alright, sure. Phoenix, up you come. Please be my guest.
Customers.
Oh, Cycling, here's a thing for you. What are those box launchers on the rear of Giuseppe Garibaldi in that picture?
Okay,
Phoenix can
sorry
explain
about that. Okay, so as far as the original question goes of why so much gun, so keep in mind that relatively early on in the Cold War, there really wasn't much in the way of point defense missiles. So you had cruisers would typically, or large frigates, whatever you want to call them, would typically get Terrier. Oh, for fuck's sake! Sorry, I'm gonna have to drop out again. It's like.
Those are anti-ship missiles. Fleet.
I was about to say on a carrier in an incredulous voice, but then I remember.
Well,
Kiev.
she's actually a cruiser. Built to do the cruiser role and carry aircraft and helicopters as needed. If you think about her this way, she's an Italian Kiev, but smaller and better.
So basically, Kiev done right.
Kiev wasn't done poorly.
Well, no, I know. But...
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Every time I start speaking, I get interrupted. Okay, yeah. So keep in mind, early Cold War, there really isn't much in the way of point defense, Sam. So your destroyers would get a Mark 13 with Tartar or SM-1 later on, and your cruisers and heavy frigates would get Terrier or Talos in the case of American cruisers, right? So first generation of frigates, for example, that come out really have, and even larger warships too, really have no dedicated short range missiles. So they were still very much reliant on guns. Now, some navies would go so far as to basically divest most guns in general. The Royal Navy, for example, basically by the time of the Falklands have the 4.5 inch and then nothing but manually aimed 20 millimeters. The Italians are always in a bit of a different situation compared to most of the major European navies, just because they were expecting to operate in the Mediterranean mostly, and in particular the Adriatic. And the Adriatic, it created this whole issue with, you could become under air attack from land very rapidly, very little warning, and you had to be prepared for that. And the same went, honestly, for surface vessels as well. If you're looking at the Yugoslav Adriatic coast, there are a ton of small islands to hide behind, which is partly why it was such a great hunting ground for motor torpedo boats in World War I. So the early generation of 76mm guns was developed to be an in-between between the 40mm Bofors and the 5-inch gun, because it was light enough that it could be used on frigates where 5-inch was too heavy, and it was also effective against aircraft where 40mm was really lacking at that point in time just because of the effective range. And the bonus was it was also quite effective against surface targets, at least smaller ones. So this got really used as what they called inner layer defense system, and kind of a predecessor really to the concept of CWIS, where sudden attack by aircraft at low level or anything that got past it, missile-based air defenses, these guns would come into play. I might have to drop out in a sec. I'll be right back.
It's alright. Take as much time as I appreciate him taking that time out of his busy work schedule anyway for me. I'm much appreciative. But so basically, you throw more shit downrange than the aircraft can reasonably deal with.
Well, remember, it's radar controlled.
Yeah, no, I know.
So you've got a heck of a bursting charge in it. It's not like flak like you're used to thinking of in a World War II sense, because it's all being fused appropriately, right? It's going to burst if it's near the target. It's very much aimed fire rather than just putting up a wall.
Oh no, I get that, but it's so much aimed fire. Some of these ships I'm seeing have 4 to 5 6-inch per side.
They don't have 4 to 5 6-inch per side. They have
Sorry,
like
no, sorry. That's me getting it.
or 3-inch.
Well, it depends on which ships you're looking at, right? Because again, this is also era dependent. So, for example, the early cruisers, for example, did have 4 guns per side. The way the fire control was arranged, you'd have 2 guns slaved to a single director, and it's supposed to take each quarter of the ship. So that way, any angle of attack you were covered, even under multiple simultaneous angles of attack, you would have some kind of inner layer defense for, low-flying aircraft or helicopters even, and surface targets too, if it came down to that. So, and as the Cold War developed and guns got better, you slowly saw the guns start shrinking down. So, for example, you didn't really see this in the cruisers because the cruisers were built in the 50s and 60s, and that's really where they ended it. But let's say for the destroyers, for example, the Adachi class destroyers, the first generation of second generation of guided missile destroyers, but the first ones used 76 millimeters. They had the more advanced 76 millimeter Kopato, which is the one that the Americans adopted as the Mark 75. Had a higher rate of fire, about 85 rounds per minute, versus the original Olegato, which was about 55 to 60 to 65, depends on the source you look at. There's kind of disagreement there. But, and these guns were basically, they did the same concept of, have guns cover each quarter, but in this case it was 1 gun per quarter rather than 2, just because of the higher rate of fire and more advanced fire control. And then, at this point in time, so it's the 76 millimeter, the more modern one gets introduced, really, it comes out into the 60s, but really enters service mostly in the 1970s. And about this era is when you start getting the first CWIS systems appearing, just because of the need for both defense against sea skimmers, which missiles really don't cover at this point in time, and also there was a huge issue with a lot of the combat management systems, the computers that the ships would run off of, right? Most of them were derived from Naval Tactical Data System, NTDS, which was a brilliant system when it was first introduced in the 50s and 60s, but with the extra number of modules, and functions it's added to the system over time and programming, it was extremely laggy. I'm talking about you could have input delays of a button press of 60 seconds or more, which was kind of unacceptable and create huge issues for anything that was going to pop up at short range, and like a sea skimming anti-ship missile. So in this sense, having dedicated CWIS systems that had basically all their fire control functions entirely separate from the combat management system was a huge advantage, because this meant they could react very rapidly against short-range threats in a way that most other systems could not. Same with a lot of the gun systems. Well, actually, a lot of these were gun systems, sorry. So at least until really modern fire control, computer combat management systems equivalent to Aegis in terms of having a tactical level fire control picture and much more modern computing. That was finally the point where you could really handle these kinds of attacks. It's saturation, large number of attacks, or short range pop-ups. Really, in terms of computing power, right? Really, before that revolution, which the U.S. Navy found first, most European navies only really got that in the 90s and later. Before that, you were really kind of dependent on these separate gun systems or missile systems, even, because you'd have, starting in the late 1970s and early 80s, dedicated point defense missile systems started appearing. So for the example, the Americans, for example, this was first Sea Sparrow and then eventually Ram, and then for the French had Crotale, the Italians had Aspide, which is basically an improved version of the early Sea Sparrow. And these kind of also started being used as point defense missiles. But I realize it's been on a huge tangent there, but just for the sake of the specific CWIS discussion, right? So for the Italians, their solution for CWIS, gun-based CWIS, initially in the 1970s was the twin 40mm Dardo system, which was basically you have two 40mm in the same turret, combined rate of fire of over 600 rounds per minute. And this you would put on, similarly to prior 76mm, you would put them on any quarter of the ship you could, just so they could defend against attacks from multiple angles. And this was supposed to be the CWIS system going forward. You see this in the generation of frigates procured in the mid-1970s, like the Maestrale class, the Lupo class, Soldati. You also see these go on carriers like like Garibaldi. This goes on the cruiser Vittorio Veneto during her midlife refit. And then this was supposed to go in the next generation of destroyers too, the Durand de la Penne class. But then in the 1980s, they were developing a new 76mm gun, the Super Rapido, which was a simpler fire control mechanism, made of more durable, reliable parts, a lot of extra titanium and stuff like that, which made them much more reliable under high rates of fire, because the older Compact had actually had an issue of shaking itself apart under really intense rates of fire for extended periods of time. And it was also improved accuracy and, of course, rate of fire. The Super Rapido famously reaches 120 rounds per minute. And with this, they realized, holy shit, we could actually use this as a dedicated CWIS in place of the twin 40mm, which is what it did. It replaced the planned 40mm installations on the next generation of destroyers. And at the time, they also started looking into guided shells to use against missiles. All the projects from like the 90s and stuff took a while to actually get into fruition because, Cold War ended, budgets got cut, interest in these kind of things dwindled, or the resources just weren't there to invest in everything. So the ultimate incarnation of this, DART, is basically only entered service in like the early to mid 2010s, but is in service now. And this is what the Italians rely on now for the CWIS. Like, Turpis just posted a picture of that's Andrea Doria herself. So she's got 3 76mm Super Rapidos arranged around the ship. They have guided shells. The basic principle is, you fire 3 guided shells per incoming target. It's about 1.5 seconds of fire. And then between the antenna on the gun and the fire control system itself, it should be able to guide the shells to intercept the target. Only problem with this is you generally have limited channels to actually engage missiles with, which is slowly getting worked around. Like the new generation of fire control directors have their own dual band radar system, so they can actually provide extra guidance channels compared to just the on-mount RF antenna. And you don't even need, with this generation, you also don't even need the on-mount RF antenna anymore even. Okay, I actually have to mute myself again, so I'll be right back.
There's more to this than I thought possible. It's dead interesting, actually. Must have Phoenix on as a guest more often, if I can manage it. He knows a lot.
That he does.
Must have Moo on as well more often, because he also knows a lot. Same thing with you. I mean, while I am glad that you showed up today, I don't want to impose on asking you to be a regular.
Most of the time I can't make this because you do it during the weekday.
Completely understandable, time zones being what it is. But basically, this is a long-standing tradition because of, well, to put it mildly, it's the only day I usually get that's been consistent throughout 2 years where I can do it. And it seems to have remained unchanged no matter what else has gone through in my life, which I find really funny. Oh, those are the new Italian destroyers with the not a ram bow.
Those aren't destroyers.
Frigates?
They're sort of like a frigate / patrol vessel.
Yeah, actually they are. Too small to be
Right, back again.
My god,
It's not that they're too small, they don't have any of the capabilities, so...
It's like, they're like driving an airliner.
Well, it's based off of like a cockpit for an aircraft, actually. That's the principle behind it.
That's an interesting way of doing things.
But yeah, just getting back to the point earlier, though, I think it's worth expanding on in terms of missiles and their proliferation throughout navies. So one thing to keep in mind is the Americans generally tended to be a generation ahead of the Europeans when it came to proliferating missiles throughout their ships. So, for example, like... actually, hang on a second. I might actually have to drop here. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Give me a second. I'll have to mute myself.
But I'm still surprised, like, from everything I've been told about missiles that I've learned recently, as far as I was concerned, like, you couldn't use a 3-inch gun to kill a missile. I'm glad to learn that I was wrong.
Alright, and we're back again. Yeah, so for example, like, for much of the early Cold War period, right, a destroyer usually had, a single Mark 13 launcher, single arm launcher, for Tartar, later SM-1MR, and, the larger frigates are then called frigates, later reclassed as cruisers, and the cruisers would have, Terrier or RIM 67, which is SM-1ER and SM-2ER, etc. Now, for the Americans, they kind of got to this revolution of radically changing what a destroyer was. Like, or in the 1970s is when they developed Aegis, Aegis hit the fleet with the Ticonderoga class destroyers. And note, they were originally destroyers in concept, and even when they were ordered, that's why they all, with the first 4 ships, have destroyer, were ordered with destroyer hull codes. Oh god damn it! I'm gonna have to mute myself in a second. Sorry.
Fine. As much as I really want to stay awake for this, I have to be wrapping this up in about 15 minutes, sadly, because I do have a lecture in the morning. So, as much as I desperately, I hope that Phoenix can wrap it up before 9 o'clock in about 12 minutes.
All right, we're back again. Sorry about that.
It's like Phoenix.
Yeah. So.
Did you hear what I said about unfortunately having to hurry you along slightly? Because I am going.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'll rush this. I'll rush through this then. Okay. So basically. Oh, sorry. I might actually have to mute myself. It might be easier if I just type this up, to be honest, because I'm gonna have to keep on jumping out.
Yeah, just
if you guys are pressed for time.
Just send me a DM. That's fine. You've covered most of what I wanted to know anyway, so thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. I'll see you guys around.
And that was Phoenix, folks, giving us a detailed rundown of Italian close-in weapon systems capabilities throughout the Cold War into the modern era, and why their ships were so covered in gun.
The Spruance class, the most capable SAMs the Spruance class ever had were point defense. Sea Sparrow, original Sea Sparrow, and rolling airframe missile. They never had anything other than that. They were not AAW ships. They were ASW, and later Strike. Even when they had VLS, those VLS did not carry SAMs.
You're looking at
VLA and Tomahawk. Mostly Tomahawk. People really underestimate the amount of Tomahawk US ships carry. It's generally, like, so for a Burke, you're generally looking at somewhere between 20 and 40% of the VLS is going to be Tomahawk. Which generally comes out to between 20 and 30
that's a fair amount. Of
Tomahawk per ship.
Excuse me. I do like, it's ironic that the only Navy's modern ships I don't like is actually my own Navy. I hate the UK's modern fleet, in terms of how they look and how limited in capability they are. When people like Italy and France and the US and even Germany and the Netherlands have more capable ships than we do. It's depressing. I mean, yeah, but still looks better than a bloody Type 45. What do you mean? Germany has destroyers. They're just called frigates.
No, they don't have destroyers fleet. Don't use tonnage
I-
for whether it's a destroyer or
I
frigate.
know. I'm being a tad facetious. You have to excuse me. Well, Cyclic, you're equipped to answer this, not me, possibly, because I don't really have the knowledge for it.
No, Germany has absolutely no need for destroyers.
We'll take one or two more questions, and then I'll wrap it up.
No, it is absolutely not a destroyer caliber vessel. Sort of the upper end of frigate.
That's a good question to wrap up on. Least favourite gun mount and why? For me, personally, my least favourite gun mount, period, has got to be the, exceedingly silly, triple 25mm mounts the Japanese came up with during the Second World War. Like, yes, they partially solved the rate of fire issue, but they are just very silly in the way they're reloaded, aimed, and trained. And I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Cyclic, thank you very much. This has been a fantastic
You're
ramblings. Glad you were here. Do let me know how that other thing goes, though, won't you?
I will.
Thank you. Alright, thank you very much, folks, for joining me. I hope you've all had as good a ramblings listening to us as we've had answering your questions. Thank you very much. Take care, folks.